can see some really interactive workshops. So the plan for this afternoon is each workshop is about 25 minutes. So we've cut the workshops to about 15, 20 minutes, but the full workshop will be available on the YouTube link. And the first workshop we have this afternoon is Avril Grufferty. And Avril is the owner of Outdoor Explorers. So it's a really, really engaging workshop. And we leave about 15, 20 minutes at the end of the workshop, the video, for you to engage in any questions or put some comments into chat. And then following that, we have Margaret Flaherty from the National Parks and Wildlife Services. And she's doing a workshop on pond dipping. So another very interesting workshop. And the third workshop we have is Dr. Davey Walsh from GMIT doing a workshop on alchemy and the arts. So you'll learn how to make clay from mud, use tools, fantastic workshop, just amazing. I've seen it. And then a fourth year outdoor ed student, Martina Killeen, is doing creativity on the go, and she brings us on a journey into a forest, and another beautiful workshop. And finally, we're going to go to the coast, and Orla Walsh is going to bring us to Old Head and engage us in a way that I've never seen before, showing us lots of seaweeds and creatures and plant and animal life in Old Head in outside Westport in Mayo. So we'll start off with Avril, and I'll hand you over now to Avril. Welcome, Avril.
Hi, hello Mary and everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome, Avril. We'll just wait till your presentation comes up on screen there.
Super, thank you. Do I turn off the camera again, or how does it work?
No, you're okay.
You're good, Avril. I'm just starting up now, so just 1 second.
Okay.
So would you like a tour around? Okay, let's go. Come on, let's go have a look. Here we have our Trike Area, and here we do loads of cycling around, and oftentimes they'll bring the bikes down and explore down the hill as well. And we have here a footpath of all different textures. So they'll pop off their wellies and they'll go in their bare feet, and they'll feel all the different textures on their feet, which is a fantastic sensory little activity. Down here we have some science, so the weighing scales. It's fantastic to see children weighing, putting wood in one and maybe a few pebbles in the other, and they'll decide which is heavier and which is lighter, and they'll be taking things out to make them the same weight. Down here we have our home corner. They often have little tea parties, and they play with their doll's house inside, and they can bring the little dolls around for walks and all that kind of thing. And we have all dotted around the garden, we have climbing frames and different materials and structures to learn how to climb, and where to position your feet and your hands and all that kind of stuff, and having the strength to pull yourself up. And we have lots of little uneven rocks here and boulders and tires over the other side. These are fantastic for core strength, balance, all these things that we take for granted, but that our children here do multiple times every day. Here we have the hill. You can see it's worn out. It's a really good favourite actually at the moment. And they'll roll down the hill, they'll climb up the hill. They have decisions to make. How am I going to get up there? Will I go up the slide? Will I go up the climbing wall? Will I just go up the grass? Every time they go up, they're using their hands. They're getting ready for writing, even though they don't even realise it. And we're doing mud pies here as well. And we have a little shop to sell our mud pies or whatever creations we make. And that's a lot of imaginative play going on with this area as well. This is our Willow Tunnel. So we made a few tunnels around the garden, and I think they're very important. The idea of them is that children feel that they're hiding, and that's another part of learning and a part of exploring at this age group, that they feel nobody can see them, so they have their own little space and their own little nook and cranny and kind of adventure area that they can hide, but the teacher can see them. We can see them in plain sight, but they feel that they're hiding, which is fantastic. If you want to come around this way. Music wall, are you going to show us? boy. We have our little orchard here. So we have apple trees and pear trees, and we have berries, blackberries and blueberries and different things over there as well. And over here we have a woodland. So during September time, it's changing all through the year, but during September it'll be really lush green, a great place for hide and seek and different things. And this time of year it's quite bare. So the canvas is always changing with the outdoors. So we have our wibbly wobbly bridge here that we can swing on. It's great for core strength, yeah? You can go on it. And over here we have our ship that sails the high seas, and our mud bath down there that we love to swim in sometimes and play in. Yeah, so we could be going to Granny's house, or we could be going to America. You wouldn't know where that ship would bring us. And we have our climbing tires here as well that have great fun, that are mighty to be able to, the pride you see in the children when they get to the top. And over here then we have our poly tunnel, and in here we plant our seeds that are for each season. So during the winter it'd be sparse enough, it'd be garlic and lettuce, maybe a few onions. But during this time of year now, we've planted a few seeds, but we're waiting for our children to come back on Monday, and they'll plant the rest of the polytunnel for the spring ahead and all the lovely growth that we're going to have. But even in the middle beds, we sometimes don't plant any vegetables. And in here, they can walk in the middle of the bed and dig and just get mucky. And just enjoy the soil and the feel of it, and finding wiggly worms and different things in it, and little creatures, and just being inspired and getting so enthusiastic about finding something is great. And in here is our sandpit. So we have lots of physical happy fun in here, don't we? And as you can see, they made a little river already here today, and they bring the water from the tap. I think it's very important that the little ones have access to the water at all times. So there's 3 different taps that they can bring water from. So they can go plant, or they can go water the polytunnel whenever they think of it. Now, and over here we have our lunch in the gazebo. So we have a rolling lunch. So we just, good boy. We explain to the children that you listen to your own belly, and when you're hungry.
Mama, you're behind you.
Oh wow! And when you're hungry, you can go in and have a bite to eat. Isn't that right? It's still moving. So oftentimes they'll do tabletop activities in here, especially if the weather is very inclement and they decide that they want to do train tracks or whatever tabletop activity they'd like to do. So they have different shapes and sizes of wood purposely, so they can create different things that they want, towers or castles or anything. And then we have the heavier items here as well. That are, good boy, for the loose parts. The heavier the timber, the better, because they'll have to ask their friends for help, don't you, Cathal? And it's all teamwork and trying to, maneuver heavy objects. It's a really good activity for little ones, and it brings different muscles into the game as well, which is good. And you show us our art zone. This is where we do all our painting and our drawing and everything. So it's a lovely little indoor area for us to have the opportunity to do our painting and our writing and our drawing. If it's raining, it'll be very difficult outside, but this is a free flow. You can go in and out all you want, and it's nice and dry in here. So this is our outdoor bathroom, and we got this about 4 years ago, and it's really helped us in our everyday program, because with the little ones, if you have a few children outside and then you go inside with one, the ratios change straight away. So for a provider that would like to set up an outdoor setting, I think that's a vital part. So I'd love to show you now a little bit about the clothing. I know everybody knows how to dress their child, but to keep in mind that it's for 3 solid hours. So us teachers, we have all these children to facilitate and to look after. So it is easier to take clothes off than put them on during the day. So once they have enough on to keep them cozy, if they do feel a little hot during the day, we can whip off a top or something. You know, it's much easier than looking for clothes. So during the summer, 2 moments now, we have them here somewhere. So we have the really light jackets. You can nearly see through them. So that'll be for September. Usually September is quite warm. It might be a little bit rainy, but it's usually quite warm. So that's perfect. Maybe a little long sleeve top and that inside on the top. And then this little trousers, and it's very light. You can see how light it is. There's no fleece inside or anything like that, and that's perfect. And then in here, so underneath will be a vest out of pennies or duns. They don't have to be expensive. But the vest is very important because it's the core heat. It keeps the body really warm, and it clings to the body. So I feel a vest is always very important. And underwear. And then after that then is the thermals. We got these in Aldi or Lidl, not sure which one, but they're great. When we're peeling these off them at home time, when they come off, the heat coming from the child, even on the coldest of days, because these thermals are mighty. They keep the child really, really warm. So maybe in September you don't need these. Maybe it'll be just a tracksuit bottoms and a long sleeve top, and then the summer outer gear. That'll be all for maybe September. But as the weather cools, November, December, be no harm to put these thermals on and then put the tracksuit on top. And I'll show you some winter outdoor gear now. And inside, they're heavy, they're real heavy. And they keep you nice and warm. And I often thought when I started first, they're only toileting at this age, how are they going to get these off? They just, within days, no problem to them. They have them off and they go in, make their wees, and they're done. So that's great, that's really warm. And the jacket then, the fleecy inside the jacket. So on the real cold days, you'd have your vest, your thermals, the long sleeve top, and the vest. This is for your real cold child now. These are my latest purchase. So they are expensive, but they're a dream. They're little mud monsters. They love the water and the mud, but they're bone dry inside them. Where did I get them? I can't see a brand name now, hold on. Pally Hansen. They're very expensive, but they're mighty. They'll do the year, you know, without having to change them. These are the wellies that I prefer. So all these typed wellies that don't have any lining, these look lovely, and you think, oh, my child is going to be so cozy in them. But the second they get wet, they're useless, and they take about 4 days to dry. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about is bags. So as I told you earlier, we do rolling lunch. So this means that the child needs to be independent. She or he can grab it out of their basket and bring it down to the gazebo. We have learned so much, not just from ourselves, but from the students, from the children themselves. Oftentimes I take a step back, especially in the early days, and think, am I doing the right thing? Like parents, because there's a lot of new parents coming out all the time, investigating us and all that kind of stuff and seeing what we're about. And I was thinking, maybe I'm pushing it too much, this outdoor idea, you know. But the children would always show me that I was doing the right thing. They always showed me that when there was a few inches of snow on the ground, it wasn't the right thing to bring them in, that they were having the best of crack down here on the hill, sliding down, and we'd go on a turf bag and we'd slide down the hill, and the crack and the excitement of running up the hill again and sliding down again, and children helping each other and the teamwork of that when I see that and I stand back and actually look at what we've achieved, I think, yes, this is the right thing. So that's our tour of Outdoor Explorers. If you have any questions, or if you'd ever like to contact me, feel free to do so. No problem at all. We love chatting to new people, and we'd love to have you come visit us. So yeah, that's a wrap for us now, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, Avril.
Are you?
Thank you
Yeah, so that's
I mean,
us.
the Comments are unbelievable, fantastic, amazing. You can see them all there yourself. We can only talk to people through the chat function, unfortunately, but I can put the questions to you. And I know we missed out on your whole introduction, and people will go back and see that again. But in relation to core strength, I just think it's really interesting, the opportunities children get for all of that. Would you like to speak about that for a minute? You know, just the whole every experience they have in relation to building those core muscles and the amount of movement that they can.
Yes, yeah, it's vital for children to be able to use all their muscles. I mean, when a child comes to visit us first to book in, I'm sure their parents can remember when they took their first steps, and they were kind of, it was a positive thing, and they were encouraging their first steps. And why stop that? Why put a screen in front of them? So I think 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds and higher need to be physical at least 3 hours a day. And this area and many more like it across the country are fantastic, because it allows the child to be a child. And I think we're growing up way too fast in this Google era, you know. So everything that we have in our garden is to promote physical fitness, and to encourage children to go into areas and to be able to pull themselves up out of them, and all that kind of stuff. Even getting your welly stuck in the mud. I mean, the crack trying to pull your welly out, and the friendship you're going to create, and the teamwork that everybody has to try and help you out of there. And, you know, and it's giggles and it's fun. And we don't realize how much core strength we're using, even doing something as simple as that, but we are doing it. And as I mentioned in the little video there, the heavier the items, the better, because it all creates teamwork. But not only that, but it creates strength in every part of your body, and you're using every part of your body, all your muscles, which is great. Yeah, so that's...
Yeah. Thanks, Avril. And it really builds on what Angela Hanscom was talking about last night, you know, that proprioception and the vestibular system, and not to be always upright, but to be rolling and to be upside down and to be spinning around. And I mean, there's just so many ample opportunities for that, and it's amazing. It really, really is.
And I've had junior infants teachers come to me and tell me that they can spot the outdoor child straight away when they come to their class, because they're sitting up and they're ready. You know, they're not slouched down, and they're not doing it out of, oh, I must sit up. They're doing it because it's just the way their body is, because they're so toned, because they've worked hard on their toning without even noticing it in preschool. And it's so important for education wise and everything. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now Deirdre asks a question here. She says, what do the children call the space? Do they say garden like you referenced early on in the video?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, we always say, oh, we'll go down to the mud pike down the bottom of the garden, or yeah, it's always garden. Yeah.
Okay.
We're a school without walls or roof.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Somebody else, will I see another interesting thing just from my perspective, because my niece goes to your setting and she calls herself an outdoor explorer, and I love it. And she says to me, I'm an outdoor explorer, you know, and she really sees herself as an explorer. I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
There's another question here. Somebody who's currently, so many comments about how fabulous and inspirational and innovative you are and creative, but one person in particular is trying to open a similar eco-hub in Limerick. And what advice might you give them starting off in terms of space and funding?
Yeah, so I suppose go to your county childcare committee for information on funding and all that kind of thing. Tusla would have a lot up on their website as well. Reference space, I suppose I got lucky. It's what I would, if I was ever to set up again, I suppose I'd look for a quiet spot as possible. But like, we have a boring coming down our road, and it's lovely to have that extension that you're so far away from the road. So we never hear cars usually, you know, maybe the odd tractor. And we have views of Cropatrick, and it's great because you can see right through our fence, and the children's eyesight goes on for forever. You know, it goes on as far as it can go, and that's another fantastic part of the setting. And if you are thinking of setting up an outdoor area, that it wouldn't have walls or wooden fences, that it'd have a see-through fence that the child can see as far as they want. You know, that's a very important part too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Avril. Another few questions. So there's a question around TUSLA inspections and what kind of issues, if any, did arise, or if you had any issues around health and safety. So for anybody who's thinking of moving outdoors, you know, just kind of what kind of feedback have you got from the inspectorate?
Yeah, they came up with all sorts, but you have to kind of remember and be grounded yourself and know what's right and what you're focused on. And know there are, you know, it is positive risky play at the end of the day. And if you were to do everything that the TUSLA or your insurance company wanted to do, you'd nearly end up as an indoor setting again, you know. So you have to kind of educate them nearly and do your research, and I suppose to give them the confidence that you understand as well what you're doing is right. So all the uneven ground, for instance, my insurance company couldn't understand that why wouldn't I have soft matting? You know, the stuff that's in playgrounds in towns. And maybe like I had tree stumps, and the bark on the tree stumps, they wanted all that taken off and the stump to be varnished. Yeah, it's common sense. And if you just keep going back to them with your common sense and stay grounded, you'll get there in the end. But that was back in 2013. So I haven't had a problem since with any of insurance company or anything like that. So I think they're coming around to the idea of it. And TUSLA, since I've opened, have actually come from different counties to have a look at our setting. So they're getting around the idea as well of outdoors, which is fantastic. So I think everybody in the last 10 or so years are wanting more outdoors and are more acceptable to, I suppose, positive risky play as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know something that you do that with children is you risk assess with them around a piece of equipment. So that might be useful for people just to hear that process, because Tim referred to it earlier, and I just think it's really important. You know, it's nice and maybe something interesting to share.
Yeah. So the big tractor tires you saw there, for instance, if a child is wanting to climb up and then she or he wants help, well, I often explain to the child that maybe we need to climb up ourselves so we know how to get down again. And they'll think about it for a while, and they mightn't even go near the tires for a few days, and then they'll go back in their own time and they'll work it out. But my job is to observe. All the teachers here at Outdoor Explorers, we step back and we observe. If we go in too fast into a situation and it doesn't work and it's not helping the child or the teacher, so you watch the child, and if she is climbing up the tire and she gets to the top, we'll maybe step in then if it's her first time, and we'll say, so Anne, have you seen any toys underneath your tire? Have a look around there. Is there anything that might hurt you when you land? And if she sees a tractor, she'll ask John that's on the ground, can he move the tractor out of the way for her to jump? And that's getting them to think about the safety measures of how they're going to jump and where they're going to land. I thought when I opened the first year, I thought it was just absolutely amazing how children, when they land, they know how to land. In my previous career, we were taught as adults how to jump from a height and land. Like we had to be taught these physical things, whereas children know innately how to do them. But us as adults, our hearts are in our mouths going, oh no, you can't do that. And we lift them down off objects. But they know how to jump off and how to land safely. It's us that are stopping them. And it's sad really, but hopefully now that it's becoming more prevalent at the outdoors, that they will start allowing children to jump off trees and all that kind of stuff, because they do know. And if you watch it and observe it, you'll see how they land, and it's perfect, you know. Yeah.
Great. Now we've loads of questions coming in. They're flying in, but we'll keep some of them until the panel discussion at 4:30. But one person asked about injuries, if there's many injuries, and then there's a few questions around emergent curriculum and any projects or investigations that the children, engage with. So injuries first, maybe.
So, injuries first, yeah. No, our injury book is pretty empty. We talk about, just for instance, like I could go on forever, but for instance, our Trike Area, so where they cycle, is a cement area. When it's icy, we tell the children that we walk like penguins just to be safe. So they walk really slow. So with every environment change through the seasons, we'll talk about how like the bark on the tree is slippy. So we need to keep an eye on that if we are climbing, that it will be slippy. But as I said before, with the landing, like, no, nobody's got hurt. They have had a few little scratches here and there, but that'll happen in an indoor setting as well. Nothing to write home about. So yeah, it's nothing. We haven't had any worries. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I know you do kind of follow a very emergent curriculum, an inquiry-based curriculum, and I see when I'm out there, children are always following their own lines of inquiry. So maybe you could speak to that for a minute or two about that.
Yeah, we have a little construction area where you saw Cahill building a tower there with loose parts. So one of our teachers will bring one or two children into it, and we'll be wearing our goggles, and we'll use hammers, and real hammers and nails, and the children have to wait. I think this is answering your question, I'm not sure. So the children have to wait, and they do kind of just watch, and they understand they have to wait for their turn and all that kind of stuff. So there, a couple of years ago, they got together because there was 5 or 6 of them bored waiting and for their turn. So they got they drew up blueprints. I don't know where they got the phrase blueprints out of, but one of their parents gave them see-through paper and they came back in the next day, and they were drawing up blueprints for a bench so they could sit down while they're waiting. So they changed the area of the construction area by having a seated area. And they did all the drawing, and they did all the hammering and making they picked out the wood, and it was real rickety, but it was absolutely unique and beautiful, and they did it themselves. So it was fantastic. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, that's fantastic. One last question, Avril, just about ratios. A few people are asking about your staff ratio, and I know you particularly, not by regulation, but you keep that low. But maybe you could just talk about that for a minute. Yeah. Thank you.
So regulations in Ireland are 11 children to 1 teacher, and I keep it to 6, maximum 7 children to 1 teacher. And my method behind the madness is that I taught in an indoor setting, and I had 11 children, and I wasn't seeing to their every need. I just don't know how teachers do that. Like, if you're being really honest, I can't, it's not feasible. So 6, 7 children is loads for 1 adult, and they all get loads one-on-one time for that as well, and they enjoy it, and we get to know the teachers a lot. I have one teacher that's on maternity leave at the moment, and they're constantly asking after her because we're like a family, and we've had our little WhatsApp videos with her and all that kind of stuff for the children because they miss her. We are like extra mammies and daddies there. But yeah, the ratios is fantastic. That's the way I do it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's brilliant. Now, we've lots of questions about risk tool brainstorming as to how you set up, and I know it was a process that emerged over a whole number of years, and some questions as well about upkeep and cost, but we'll save them for now until the panel discussion.
Perfect. Yeah.
Avril, thank you so very much.
No problem.
So lovely to see it in practice and bringing outdoors to life for us. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Mary. Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Avril. Next up, we have Margaret Flaherty, who's going to do some pond dipping. So, hi, Margaret. You're on mute, Margaret, just there. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
I'll sign off, Margaret, and I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll have a chat after the video.
Perfect.
Okay.
So, hi everybody, I'm delighted to be joining you here today. So today's activity I'll give you, or workshop, it'll be an insight into an outdoor activity that we do at the National Park Visitor Centre in Ballycroy here in Mayo. So just to give you a bit of background, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, they have a number of education centres around the country, one of which is the Ballycroy Visitor Centre. And they've got there's 6 national parks altogether in the country. And there's a couple of nature reserves as well that have some education centres. So the whole, the remit of the education centres is, I guess, a means of promoting awareness, knowledge and appreciation of nature in Ireland, because the National Parks and Wildlife Service are responsible for nature conservation. So by providing education programmes, we're hoping to foster individual and collective responsibility for the protection and the conservation of our natural heritage in particular. The programs that the education centres offer are free of charge for both the public and for schools, and they're run by very experienced and qualified national park staff that have backgrounds in ecology, conservation, heritage. So, you know, you get a really good quality service when you come in to us, if I can say myself. And I guess a bit about my background, because I think we are very much, a lot of the National Park staff are very much shaped by their background and, you know, the introduction to nature and wildlife that they were given as children. And Anya's talk this morning really struck a chord with me, and all about place-based learning. And I had a similar childhood outdoor playground, for the want of a better words, where I spent lots of time splashing about in streams, looking for what lived there along the seashore, in the sea, in the rivers, in the meadows. Growing up in Connemara, I didn't have too many trees to climb, but there were lots of stone walls for climbing. So, you know, I think that has really stood to me, and it's kind of shaped where I've gone with this passion for nature and for, you know, passing on the information and knowledge that I have through my studies and through my own background. So I hope you're going to enjoy today's pond dipping activity, and hopefully it'll give you some tools yourselves to get out and explore this type of habitat. So yeah, we can start the video. Thanks.
Hello, welcome to Wild Nathan National Park. I'm Margaret Flaherty, Supervisor Guide at the Ballycroy Visitor Centre. Wild Nathan National Park is one of 6 national parks in Ireland. The national park is 15,000 hectares in size, encompassing Atlantic Blanket Bog, the Nathanbeg Mountains, and extends from Bangor to Mulranny, from Ballycroy to Newport and up to Bellacorrick. It's a landscape of mountains and bogs and forest, and it's the 3rd largest that we have in the country. The visitor centre was opened to the public in 2009, and since that time we've been running environmental education programs. We have an exhibition that interprets the species and the habitats of the national park, but we are also lucky to have an outdoor classroom here as well, with different habitats that both children and adults can explore. So we have a 2-kilometre nature trail, which brings people around the hill at the visitor centre. There's views from the top of the hill of the Nathanbeg Mountains, of Achill and the surrounding seascapes. We have a second 2-kilometre trail, 10 minutes drive south of the visitor centre, called Clagan Mountain Coastal Trail. Visitors get to walk on a 1-kilometre wooden boardwalk, and they return along the seashore, where they might encounter species such as ringed plovers and otter and different seabirds. The National Park was designated as Ireland's first dark sky park in 2016. The park is one of the best places in Ireland and the world to see the night skies. Here at the Ballycroy Visitor Centre, we have lots of activities for people to do and things for people to see. We have an exhibition which interprets the national park's species and habitats. There's a little about the dark skies. We've also got some habitats for people to explore outside. We've got a meadow, we've got a cereal plot that attracts pollinators and birds. We've got a 2-kilometre trail which gives people an opportunity to explore the bogland habitat. But today we're going to be focusing on one activity. We're going to be doing some pond dipping where we will explore the life that lives beneath our bog pools. We're just making our way to the pond area. It's only a couple of minutes walk from the visitor centre, and we're meeting Michael Chambers, who is the head guide here at the visitor centre, and he's going to do a demonstration of pond dipping. So Michael is moving the net through the water in a figure of 8 motion, and he's seeing what kind of creatures he's getting in the main body of the pond. Some people come across these bog pools or ponds with their dark, murky water and actually don't think that there's much life in them, but they're actually full of life. There's a diversity of animals and plants that live in these ponds. Today, we're hoping to find some of the animal life that depends on these water bodies. So we might find some amphibians, we might find some frogs or newts, or even some tadpoles. We would expect to find some dragonfly or damselfly larvae or nymphs. So when we see the damselfly or the dragonflies flying around, they've actually spent the majority of their life underwater. So dragonflies and damselflies, they lay their eggs beside these water bodies. Larvae hatch out of these eggs and spend a huge amount of their life below the water. So as I said, the damselflies and dragonflies that we see flying around, it's only a very, very short part of their life that they are at that stage. We get a great variety of beetles in the pond as well. The Horlygig Beetles can be seen zooming around the pond on the top of the water and diving down deep. We also get the great diving beetle, which is really interesting. It can fly from pond to pond. Sometimes it leaves a pond when it gets too busy and they seek out a new pond. And to find a new pond, they use the reflection of the moon on the water to find their new place to live. While I've been talking here, Michael beside me has been very busy. He's been using the pond net to see what creatures are in the water. And now let's go and have a closer look of what he's captured.
So I've already been around the pond and we filled up a few of these trays that we've scattered around the pond here with some very interesting creatures that we found living within the pond. So our ponds are very much full of life, and so far we've found a number of tadpoles, some damselflies, and we've a beautiful newt here making his way around the tray, and we've some diving beetles and back swimmer beetles also in here, and there's also some phantom larvae and midge larvae. So already you can see there's a huge range of biodiversity in a small little pond like this.
Michael's done a great job today. He's found an abundance of different types of creatures. So we're going to go through these trays now and identify the different animals that we found. To do this, we're going to use some charts that we have, some identification charts. We can download a lot of free stuff online now, so you don't need to worry about buying things. But we have a few here that we've bought over the years. So this is a great one that's showing lots of different types of animals that you get in fresh water, like our pond here at the visitor centre. So we'll be using that today. There's other really simple ones as well. You can download templates off the Irish Peatland Conservation Council. So you can download this for free, print it out and make your own bug dial. So this is a really neat thing to use. Very fun activity to get the kids to actually prepare the bug dial in advance, print and then bring it out to the pond to identify the creatures. And if you really get into your pond life, you can also buy like little books like this, which are full of really nice photographs and descriptions of lots and lots of different types of animals and even plants that you get in ponds as well, and in rivers and lakes, and all different types of freshwater bodies. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try and take some of these animals out, and I find using a spoon is a really easy thing for kids to do. It's good for adults as well, and you can just pick up things on the spoon. So you can just search through the trays, which are white, so it makes things a little easier to see, and you just literally scoop up the animal. And here is my first one, which is a great animal. This is a nymph of a damselfly. So earlier I was talking about the importance of ponds for the life cycle of things like damselflies and dragonflies. I know this is a damselfly because it has 3 tails, so you can see that. It's got quite a thin body, and it's got 2 really large compound eyes at the top of its head. So this is a really nice find today. So Michael's done a great job for us. So that, as I said, is our damselfly nymph. So we'll put him back in, and I'll find something else a little different. We've got lots of tadpoles in here, so I'm sure you're all familiar with tadpoles. Obviously, water bodies are really, really important places for tadpoles for their development. So earlier in the year, around February time, March, we had lots of sounds coming from the pond here. We had croaking frogs, and it's the male that's actually croaking. He is croaking really loud, trying to attract a female. The female comes to the pond, and then she is the male and the female mate, and the frog spawn is fertilized, and you get rafts of frog spawn, thousands and thousands of eggs. A female can lay nearly 4,000 eggs at a time, and she'll head off once she's laid her eggs. The male will hang around and hopefully get another female. So these tadpoles have hatched out of that frog spawn. Not all of them will survive. It's a pretty tough place to live, a pond. There's a lot of predation that goes on. And I'll see, can I find one of our ferocious predators in here. Just bear with me. So as you can see in the pond, it's very brown and murky, lots of vegetation, and the animals that are living there tend to be the same colour. So it can be sometimes a little difficult to see what you've got. And I've actually got in action here a diving beetle larvae feeding on a tadpole. So we've got predation happening in front of our eyes here. So anybody of a sensitive nature should look away. What we've got is we've got a great diving beetle, and it's got its jaws wrapped around a poor unfortunate tadpole. But that's life in the pond for you. It's a tough place to live. So again, this diving beetle, it does live in the pond as an adult, but it has a very different form in its larval stage. Very elongated body, but with these giant jaws or pinchers at the top of his body, and you can see him in action there. It's a bit gruesome. So on to our next species. So I don't think I have found the Horlygig beetles. So these are small little beetles. They're oval in shape. I did see some earlier on. Now the Horlygig beetles, they swim really, really fast. They're quite small. There he is. Oop. Got him. So this again is another beetle that we get in the ponds. It's called a Horlygig beetle. And as you can see, he's quite a fast swimmer. And if you look closely, they can kind of have a green iridescence to their exoskeleton, so the shell that covers their body, and they have red legs. And this is the one that you'll see zooming around the top of the water. It'll be diving deep down into the water body as well. oval in shape. So that is the Horlygig beetle. So let's see what else we have here. Oh, so we've got a couple of different types of what are called water boatmen that live in the pond. We've got the lesser boatman and then the greater boatman. And another name for the greater boatman is the back swimmer, because this actually swims on its back. Now, I'm hoping it doesn't fall off the spoon here. So what we're looking at the belly of this animal. He's dark on its belly and he's white underneath, but the underneath part is actually his back. And in some countries, I think they refer this to this animal as the water wasp. And this back swimmer can actually give you a nasty bite. So this is one you need to watch out for if you do come across it, and definitely use a spoon to pick it up. This animal is a ferocious predator. What it does is it punctures the outer exoskeleton of its prey, or the skin of its prey, and it injects a toxic saliva into the prey and sucks out the insides. Pretty gruesome again. I should have probably put a sensitivity warning on that, but this, as I said, is life in a pond. It's a tough place to live. Now, I'll see if there's anything else that we can find in here. So I've got one final thing to show you. So I'm just going to move this tray aside, and I'm going to put this into its own tray because it's quite a big creature that I'm going to show you next. So we're really lucky here at the visitor centre to have this pond, because it's a great habitat for lots of different creatures, and this one is pretty special. So what we have here is we have what's called a smooth newt. In Ireland, we only have 3 native species of amphibians. We've got the common frog, we've got a natterjack toad, which has restricted distribution down in the south of the country, and we have the smooth newt. And the smooth newt is actually quite common, but a lot of people don't see them. They're very, very secretive animals. What they do is they hibernate over winter, and then they come to places like our pond here at the visitor centre to lay their eggs. They don't lay eggs like the frogs do. They lay singular eggs and attach them to vegetation. And they might a female might lay a few hundred eggs at a time. This is actually a male newt, and I can tell that he's a male because he has a crest. And I'm just going to move a little bit back here so you can see him. So you can see he's got this crest down his back, and we know that it's a smooth newt because we don't have any other newt species in this country. And if you looked underneath him, and I'm not going to disturb him now too much, you will see that he has an orange stripe on his belly as well. So that's another key identification features of smooth newts. So one of the most important things to do is when you're finished is to put everything back where you found it. This pond is a habitat for those creatures. They won't survive outside it. And the principles here in the national park are to leave what you find. So it's very, very important to return these animals to their home when we're finished. I hope you enjoyed the little taster of our pond dipping activity at the Ballycroy Visitor Centre that we've done today. As you can see, it's a really easy activity for children to do, and it's not that expensive. You know, you can get a net fairly cheap. There's lots of ID charts that you can download off the internet, and a jar or something to collect the items. You know, it's very, very easy, and children love it. They love digging around in the ponds with a net, and then they're rewarded with finding the different kind of creatures that are living there. Here at the Ballycroy Visitor Centre is one of a favourite activity for our visitors, whether the schools or the public, and we regularly do this pond dipping activity. It's free to come and visit us, and we'd love to see you here after lockdown when it's safe to travel again, and we'll be doing lots of different types of activities, and you can just come in, look at the exhibition, go for a cup of coffee and come out to our pond and see maybe what you can find out here, with the help of one of our guides, of course.
Thanks so much, Margaret. That was absolutely fascinating. Who'd believe all the life that we have in a small little, in a little tiny catchment space like that. Amazing, amazing. So we have a few questions. I'll just, one of the questions from Fiacres, what's the busiest time of year for the centre?
The busiest time of year would be the summer months, when we would get all the holiday makers, because we're not just open for education and schools. We have an exhibition that's open to the public as well. So we would be very busy in July and August. And then for our education program, September would be quite busy. We also do secondary schools education program, where we do ecology studies. So yeah, it can be very busy when the weather's a little bit better. So usually after Easter and September for schools, but we can take schools throughout our season. Our staff, we have mostly seasonal staff that are there from March until October, November time.
Oh, great. Thanks for that. Somebody else is wondering, is there any books that you'd recommend for freshwater species in ponds and rivers?
Yeah, so I've just shared a couple of free resources, downloadable resources like simple ID sheets in the chat. The book that I showed in the video there is a Collins guide, which would be very, available in lots of bookshops, and it's just freshwater life. But there's a huge amount of resources out there. If you're starting off, I think, with nature, just getting the very broad ID chart for, there's a Collins guide to Irish wildlife, I think it's called. And, that would have very general wildlife identification photographs and descriptions. But if you're particularly interested in a certain habitat, there are lots and lots of books. It's hard to recommend one over the other. Yeah, your local bookshop will probably have, some introductory books and that.
Yeah, fantastic. Somebody is doing their dissertation, and I think what they need is maybe some engagement with yourselves. I don't know if they could contact the centre, or maybe there might be an email address for you that they could contact you in relation to research.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to help. And we're quite a close network around the country with the National Parks Education Centres. We work quite closely in terms of communicating regularly. So I'd be happy to be involved in any research. And as I know my colleagues around the country would be. So I can pass on my email to that person. That's not a problem.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Margaret. Yeah. And finally, one question that came in the chat box is, do you know what the pH is in the pond?
Oh, I actually don't know what the pH is. It's probably acidic, because the pond itself is fed by rainwater. That's actually a man-made pond. So as I mentioned in the video, the visitor center was built in 2009 or 2008, 2009. And at that time, we dug out that pond, and we're extending that pond area because it's such a popular activity. And what you didn't see in the video is that there's a bit of construction going on beside us, where we're actually making a bigger pond. And what we found at the visitor center with that pond, because it's in a peaty area, like a bogland, it's starting to fill in at the edges. So what we are thinking of doing is let that smaller pond become what's called a bog garden, which will have sphagnum mosses, which is a plant that lives in bogs, and have that kind of infilling process for people to see, like a natural kind of bog formation in that pond, and then leave the bigger pond then for the pond dipping activity. So we're at the visitor center. We actually run the visitor center as sustainably as we can, and we manage the grounds for biodiversity. So I mentioned we've got a lot of different habitats around the visitor center. So this new pond area will increase that wetland or that pond space. So hopefully attract more invertebrates in. and maybe frogs and newts. And as I said, we could have this demonstration place showing the infill process and how bogs are created. And another thing I didn't mention in the video actually is that this time of year isn't always the best for going into ponds. It's as the temperatures warm up and the things start growing and they're going to get bigger. So I know it was quite difficult to see that that diving beetle eating the tadpole there, but that diving beetle can get quite long and it's always more spectacular, you know, for the children when the animals are a little bit bigger. And I actually had I was fortunate in that I was out with a school group one day where that exact thing happened, where we could see predation and could see a poor unfortunate tadpole getting eaten. And it was great, you know, there was kids, like the excitement of the children seeing that. Some were obviously disgusted but like, you know, it's great because they're just learning that that's what goes on in nature. And you know, we don't have to watch, you know, the documentaries from the Serengeti. Like we can go down to our local pond and see some of, you know, that kind of wildlife in action.
Oh, fascinating. I think Richard Loeb is bringing out a new book about engaging with the wildness of nature rather than just the pet side of things. So not fascinating, Margaret. Loads of lovely comments thanking you, saying how interesting it is. And I have the email address for the person doing the research, so I'll pass that on to you. Perfect. So once again, thank you very, very much. Very enjoyable. Lots of thank yous coming in.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So next up we have Davey Walsh, and this is an incredible presentation. I've watched it twice already on alchemy in the outdoors. So I'll hand you over to Davey, who teaches in the outdoor ed program and also into the early years program. He teaches a module on outdoor play, which we'll also be doing in school age childcare. So Davey, over to you.
Thanks, Mary, and you're all very welcome. As Mary said, I'm a lecturer in the outdoor education program and the early childhood education and care program in the Mayo campus. I've worked in the outdoors my entire life. I think listening to what other people are saying, I grew up like a feral child. I had so much experience outdoors, and I've never really lost that connection with the outdoors. And it's something that I'm always trying to advocate, and I'm always trying to encourage young children to get out and explore the outdoors. So the video presentation today is based on a workshop I gave on creative arts in the outdoors. We filmed it with participants, so there's 2 participants, and I really want to just thank Ali and Luke for their support. We had 4 seasons fired at us in about 2 hours, typical west of Ireland weather. So again, the reason for having participants was I just felt that it might come across more natural if I was teaching and actually holding a proper workshop. So I'll let you be the judges of whether that's worked out. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to all your questions afterwards. Thank you.
You're all very welcome to this workshop in Alchemical Art. It's part of an outdoor play conference, and we're filming here on the Woodland Trail in the Mayo campus in GMIT, which we use for a lot of outdoor education and early childhood outdoor play kind of activities. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction of what we're going to do today, and then we're going to get stuck in. So basically, alchemical art is probably not a term that most people are familiar with, but it's basically a mix of alchemy and art. So the philosophy and mysticism and spirituality of alchemy we're not going to be using today, but the basic idea of transforming one material into another material and the kind of, you know, experimentation and observation is something we're going to draw on. So really today is a mix of using some basic physical science techniques in order to create material that we can then use to create art. Okay? So the 2 activities we're going to do today is, one, we're going to transform the earth beneath our feet into clay, from modelling clay. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take some living willow branches and transform them into carbon for making sketching pencils with. Okay, so that's basically it. I think we just get stuck into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to transform some earth into clay. So this is a really engaging activity for a young child. It's really a kind of type of messy play. So they get to do lots of different things. So they get to dig up the earth they get to put it into buckets, they get to mix water with it, they get to sieve it, they get to pour it. So in terms of an activity, it's a really, really engaging activity for a young child. And I found when I've done this with young children that they tend to almost enjoy the activity of making clay just as much as the modelling and the artwork that comes after the clay. So there's a couple of things we need in order to make some clay, and these are all basic household items, okay? So there's no reason to go out and spend a fortune on these items. So the two kind of fundamental things we need, of course, is just containers. So effectively, in order to make clay, we have to extract some earth, and then we have to extract the clay from the earth, okay? So we need an initial container. This is just a mop bucket in order to put the clay into, or put the soil into, okay? We need some sort of digging instrument. So I've brought a proper shovel, but again, for a young child, if depending on where they're digging, they can just use a trowel like this. Or alternatively, just give the child the bucket and say, bring me back some earth, and let the child come up with whatever creative way they want to use to gather the actual soil. So that will usually involve getting a stick maybe and to poke the ground and to pick it up with their fingers, okay? So the other thing that we need then is basically some sort of net or a sieve, okay? So this is just basically a kind of a butterfly net. It's a bit light, but it will do. This is a bit sturdier, so this is, again, it's a project to itself. So basically what we have here is we have some young willow saplings that we've just basically bound into a ring, and then we've just basically stitched this net onto this particular ring. This net is from a bag of kindling sticks, okay? The other net you could use is an onion bag that, you know, and the vegetable kind of nets that you get. They're perfect, and they're a nice little project as well. The final thing then that we need is we need a finer way of catching the clay. So again, this is just an old bit of bed linen, you know, you can use an old t-shirt or anything like that, and that just is the final process. On top of that then, the only other thing that we need is water, okay? So that's basically all the things we need to make clay. So we're going to get Luke to fill up a bucket, about maybe 3/4 full, with just soil that we can find locally. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get Ali to pour in water pretty much to the top of the bucket. She's going to start agitating and mixing, and what we want to do is we want the really fine clay particles to get mixed up in the water, okay? So we might get her to actually put her hands into the bucket and squeeze it and actually try to extract as much clay as possible. Once we've done that and we've agitated the mix, then what we're going to do is we're going to probably get Luke to pour the bucket back into the other container, but we're going to sieve it. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove any kind of heavy material, any stuff that hasn't been broken down. So what we should end up with is one container that just has water and clay particles. That's it for it all in. So we just want to rub and just try to get as much of that water through the net, just to extract as much clay from the soil as possible. Again, if we had time, you could just let that drip. But for now, we'll just give it a bit of a move around. Okay. And then any excess matter we can actually just put back into the hole we dug in order to actually extract the soil in the first place. So we now have a bucket full of clay mix with water. So what I'm going to do is, just for illustrative purposes, I'm just going to spill some of this water into this clear container so you can actually see what's happening when we leave it settle. Okay, so that's basically the process for now, right? You need to sit and this needs to settle. So making clay as opposed to the charcoal is a longer process, and what I usually do is I usually kind of make the clay one day and then maybe introduce the clay to the kids the next day. So you want this bucket to sit for at least 45 minutes, and then what we'll do is we'll siphon off the clear water from the top, and we can repeat that process for quite some time before we go into the final kind of process. Now that we've allowed the mixture to settle, you can see here that the kind of finer clay particles are beginning to settle on the bottom, and we just have the excess water then on top. So the first thing we need to do is just very slowly just kind of pour the top of it, trying to make sure that we don't actually take the rest of it with us. Okay, so we're going to do that with the large bucket as well. And what I would recommend is that you might do that process maybe 2 or 3 times. So you could let that sit again for another 40 minutes, and then take off the excess water. You're trying to get rid of as much of the water and leave as much of the clay particles as possible before we finally go into the last process. So I'm just going to do the same with this bucket here. Okay, so I can just see it's just beginning, the sediments, it's just getting darker there. So again, we have a much darker colour now, and the idea would be to let that sit again for another maybe 40 minutes or thereabouts. Just for demonstration purposes, we're going to pretend that we've let the bucket settle for another maybe 45 minutes. Again, you can leave the bucket settle for a whole day and you'll come back and you can nearly drink the water from the top. It'll be crystal clear. And so if you want to do this process over a few days, that's no problem whatsoever. So after doing this a few times, we're going to now try to get rid of, or try to capture all the really, really fine particles of clay. So we've just basically used a bit of old material, tied it around the bucket, and we're just going to pour this in and just let this drip into the bucket. So again, it's no harm just to maybe give it a mix. So again, you don't want to fill up, you want to just let it settle a bit and then continue to kind of keep on adding to it. So the product we're going to end up with is the product that's sitting on top of the towel itself, okay? All the rest of the surplus water can be just discarded. Okay, so this is basically the final product. This is the clay. Again, you should be able to pick it up without it completely sticking to your hands. Again, and every kind of soil you use is going to probably have a different clay content. So some soils are going to be really rich in clay material, others are not. So again, it's just a matter of experimentation. So this is quite wet still at the moment. If you're going to use this for pottery or for sculpting, you probably want it a bit drier, okay? What we're going to do with this today is we're actually going to create some tree faces. So one method that I think is quite useful is the kind of almost just stick and gluing. So if you put this onto the surface and then actually stick stuff to it, as opposed to taking the whole lump of clay and shaping a face out of it. So we've brought in two artists, Ali and Luke, who are going to go ahead and try and make some nice artistic faces on trees with this stuff and other natural material they can gather. Once you actually process the clay, you want to just make sure that you keep it in an airtight container. So put it in a lunchbox, put it into a plastic bag. Once it's in an airtight container, it should keep for a couple of months. If you need to add a bit more water to it, you can. So, and even if it comes quite hard, you can just add water and mix it in again. So again, there's a pretty long shelf life with it. If you want to actually use it for pottery and for making stuff out of the clay, then you are looking at, having to heat it up and either baking it or leaving it to dry for quite some time. But you will get something quite a hard material afterwards. Okay, so now we're going to look at making charcoal pencils. So again, this is a very engaging activity to do with young kids. There's something about handing a child a cutting instrument that just basically they light up the minute they see it. So there's a kind of risky element to this as well. So the kid is just automatically engaged the minute you say go cut down a branch from a willow tree, for example. There's also a fire involved in this. So again, the fire can be quite mesmerizing, outside fires usually are. And then finally there's the process of making the charcoal with a kind of reveal of the pencils at the end. So again, another very tactile, very visceral type of play and outdoor learning in terms of child development and so forth. Like the clay, there's a science behind this as well. So again, there's something quite special happening in the process. So we're basically creating carbon from something that's living, okay? And we'll see that process in due turn. So the type of stuff that you need in order to create some kind of charcoal pencils, if you like. So the first thing you have to need is a cutting instrument. And again, it's great to be able to give the child the opportunity to cut and harvest this material themselves. So one of the things I tend to use is a little mini hacksaw. I have two versions here. This one is just way more ergonomic and it's easier for the child to hold. These ones, they'll do it a pinch, but they're not fantastic, okay? So the reason I like to use something as simple as this is it introduces a relationship with the material that the child is working with. So if they push too much, it's going to get stuck. If they don't push hard enough, it's not going to cut. So they have to build up a relationship with the material they're working with, and I think that's really a fundamental skill, and it's so fundamental to any sort of craft that they begin that kind of working relationship with the products and with the raw material. So they're your two basic options. Again, it won't cut. If it jumps onto a child's hand, it generally won't cut them. But like anything, you want to introduce good etiquette. So obviously, if they can get two hands onto a tool, then obviously they can't cut their other hand. If they have to use one hand, then the other hand, just make sure that it's a good bit away from them, okay? The other option is a Secateurs, and again, most kids at this stage that you have in your care have already possibly used scissors, for example, and so this isn't far from a scissors. Obviously, it's more lethal than a scissors, but again, I think for most children, they understand the risks involved. Again, if it's a big branch that they're cutting, they may want to put two hands on the scissors, and again, that just means that the other hand is never going to get cut. If you have older kids, maybe teenagers, you could introduce something like a pruning saw, which is absolutely fine as well. This one will tend to cut a bit more, so this is definitely for older kids. Again, they can normally get two hands on the actual handle itself, and that means then that they're not having to risk the other hand. The other thing that we tend to use is a potato peeler. So we want to be able to shave the bark off the living willow. It's not fundamentally necessary. You can still get something to sketch with if you leave the bark on. But what this particular item does is it gets them used to what you would think of shaving with a knife. So that working away from their fingers, and a kind of very basic kind of something that really should become first principles when you're working with a knife. So if you're going to introduce knives later on, this is a fundamental step to making sure that they're safe. And again, they can handle it just like a knife, okay? The final thing you need is you need something to burn the actual, well, we're not burning it, that's the trick of charcoal, but you need something contained the living willow that therefore is going to be placed on top of the fire, okay? So again, this is just a biscuit tin with a little hole just knocked into it, okay? You want the hole to be no bigger than the size of a pencil, okay? What you're trying to do is you're trying to ensure that the material doesn't combust. You don't want flames coming out of this hole, you just want smoke, okay? So the matter, if you like, in terms of the willow remains, but the moisture and the impurities are extracted from it. And that's it. That's pretty much what we need. Okay, so let's go harvest some willow. So the great thing about willow is that it grows back twice as vigorously, so it's a really good one to use for craft projects like this. Luke and Ali have harvested the willow. So again, what we're looking for is willow around the size of your thumb, okay? So if it's too thin, it won't be very useful, and if it's too big, it's going to take quite a long time for the process to happen. So this is Ali picked this one, a slightly thinner one, so we'll see how it works out. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to simply cut this material that's been into certain sections that will work for our So again, you can see that this process, even for myself, is quite difficult. So the hacksaw method might be a lot better, okay? So we just want to, and it really is about experimentation. We might find that these might be maybe a bit too thick. The more you gather, the more you harvest, the longer the process takes. So this is literally, this isn't a lot. So if you've got a bunch of children in your care, not everyone's going to need to get hold of a stick, but you want to kind of include everyone at the same time. Okay, for today's purpose, that'll do it fine. Okay, so we want to cover that up. And what we're going to do then is we're just going to add some heat. So again, if you have a campfire, that would be the obvious thing to use, okay? But for today, I'm going to use this particular, just a worktop stove, so it's more visible in terms of the process. So what we're going to keep an eye out for is when the kind of thick smoke starts coming out of it. That's when it's really working the process. And then eventually that smoke is going to actually disappear somewhat. And it's at that point we're going to take this off the gas ring and we're going to have created our carbon or charcoal pencils, okay? So the charcoal is a very, again, like clay modelling, it's a very old and ancient technique. And quite often it was used to create a hotter and cleaner fire, okay? We also have, there's artwork in a cave in Australia that date back, I think it's 28,000 years ago, and they've actually found charcoal being used for those particular paintings. So again, everything we're doing today is extremely ancient and it's been with us for a very, very long time. Okay, obviously if you're going to use an open fire, then obviously a good pair of work gloves are going to be quite useful for it, okay? So I'm just going to pop this on here. We're just going to leave that now. One thing I like to do is just maybe give it a bit of a shake, okay? So if you have a good set of tongs, perfect, a good set of work gloves, again, it's just to give it a bit of a rattle, just so all the pieces get charred nicely, okay? And we can still see smoke coming out of it. So we're going to just keep it going until that smoke quietens down a bit. Okay, so we've turned off the gas a while ago. We've just let everything cool down. So we allowed about maybe 35 minutes for this. So again, depending on the size and shapes, it may need a bit longer, but usually you wait until the smoke has stopped rising from the top of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and try open that. Okay, so you can see there that the larger ones didn't actually burn so well, but we've definitely got some of the smaller ones did, okay? So it's all about observation, experimentation, getting a feel for the process. Sometimes you're going to get it absolutely right first time. Other times, there's nothing stopping us from putting that back on the ring and actually just putting it back on for another 5 minutes and just to ensure that everything is done. But for the purpose of today and enough for the kids, there's enough there to be playing with. So if Luke and Ali, if you want to grab one of them, and if you just want to maybe see how to sketch on a sheet of paper. Okay, so we've just made some clay, we've made some charcoal pencils. But again, we don't need to go to such a length if you just want to draw and sketch outside using raw material. So for example, this is just the dirty clay water that we had, and this is just a normal stick. So again, just literally by sticking it in, we can just kind of draw something here, or just write. Okay, so again, we can change the sticks. Okay, we can use maybe a pine cone, spruce cone actually, maybe to put in a thicker brush stroke. We can use some moss. So with the moss, I find it's better just to squeeze some of the excess stuff out of it. So again, maybe if you're drawing a tree and you want to just put little foliage on the trees, maybe the leaves, drawing bushes, or again, if we want to cover a lot of, literally whatever you find and just use whatever's there. It's such a simple thing to do, so you don't need to go through all the elaborate process that we've done today. If you just have good quality paper, this is cartridge paper, so the kind of, it soaks in the ink itself. And from that, then it's just a matter of allowing them to just literally find a dirty puddle and give them a sheet, and actually they can start drawing and just start playing with it. So I hope you got something out of that. I hope you can use it. Again, it's all about improvisation, experimentation. Like everything is about getting a feel for what you're working with, and really improvisation is key. The minute you go outside, all your senses are much more open, you're much more aware. The child is just so kind of drawn into these materials, whether it's the messy play, whether it's the transformation of charcoal. But again, trying to incorporate the outdoors and use the outdoors is really the key. And once a child's imagination is allowed to grow in terms of what they can use, what they can process from natural materials, it makes little to no sense to go into an art shop to buy some modelling clay or to get some pencils when you can actually do it yourself. And again, the clay can be done over a couple of days. Likewise, the charcoal, you can introduce different drawing techniques with different charcoal and so forth, and different types of materials to work with. So again, there's really no reason. Just grab a raincoat, bring them outside, and actually begin to experiment and begin to play. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Cheers, Davey. That was super. So many amazing comments coming in from people. Incredible. They love it. Lots of ideas. So I think people have really got a lot of practical ideas from you there. So thanks for that. I'll just give you some of the questions that have come in. And the first one is from Sinead, and she says, what's the relationship of mirrors to alchemy?
I'm going to guess that is a reference to Roger Bacon's book that he wrote back in the, I don't know, 1500s. I think it was called The Mirror of Alchemy. I saw that, and when I came in, I was like, what is the relation? And then I remember that particular book. I should say that the title of the presentation, Alchemical Art or Alchemy in the Outdoors, the reasons why I chose that was, as a young child growing up, there was no distinction between magic and science for me, because there was so many processes in science that I just found magical and awe-inspiring. So a simple thing as wrapping a copper wire around a nail, attaching a battery to it and watching it become a magnet. To me, that was magic. And yet, for some reason, through my kind of formal education, science became very stuffy and claustrophobic and abstract and very kind of objectified. So I wanted to bring back that magic into what's going on here in front of us. And I think that we really have to use that kind of sentiment when we work with children outside. Like, nature is a miracle, and it's awe-inspiring, and it's just the most magical place to work in. So that's one of the reasons why I was kind of using that. I'm not claiming to be an alchemist.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you, Davey. There's another question from Fiacre wondering, is the willow easy to harvest?
Yeah, we're blessed in terms of the grounds we have around the Mayo campus. We have a lot of willow. So as a general rule, whenever we take a branch of a willow for a project like this, we'll also just clip it and we'll stick the rest of it back into the ground. So it's such an easy wood, and it's so forgiving to work with. Like, if you cut willow, it's going to grow back twice as vigorously. If you just literally clip it and stick an end into the ground, it'll come back. In fact, it's almost impossible not to have it come back. So it's fantastic to work with. Yeah, very easy to harvest.
And Nora here makes a comment saying that you could obviously crush up berries, wild berries, for colours to enhance, to use with your drawings and with the artwork as well.
Yeah, so you can literally just, like a bag of old salad left in your kitchen, rather than composting it, just put it through a food blender, and you need to kind of add what's called a mordant, which is basically a kind of a fixing agent. Normally use a little drop of vinegar, but again, it's so simple to create inks. And dyes and everything else. Like willow, for example, if you boil willow, you get a lovely purple hue from it, from the water. So yeah, there's just so much to play with.
Oh yeah, no, fantastic. Loads of people still commenting on the ideas and how amazing they are and all of that. So that's brilliant. One other question, Davey, are those saws specifically children's hand saws? They're lovely and they're small.
So the saws you saw there, they're called junior hack saws, and they're not specifically designed for kids. I know some of the forest schools in England will actually sell stuff it is genuinely designed for young children. Again, the hacksaw, it's just not the obvious thing for cutting wood, and it does take the child a lot longer to cut the wood with a hacksaw, but it really does bring in that motion and that idea of kind of using tools. I have noticed just in the comments, there's a number of people just, and it's really sad to see that certain insurance companies are not allowing, I saw one there, it wouldn't allow a child use a hammer. I think that there's a number of ways around that. One of them, and I don't know if you can see this here, but this is a hammer I made with a child. So if a child makes their own instrument, I'm not sure if that gets you out of an insurance loop or not. What's the difference between a child hammering with a stone and hammering with something that they've purchased? The other thing is that, cutting tools are always a difficult one, but there's plenty of sharp edges in nature. I've worked with flint a lot as well, and so if a child is allowed to use natural materials, there's usually a way of introducing natural tools. So and that might be one kind of cheeky way around some of the insurance problems. So
yeah, I think that's a bigger discussion as well. I know that might come up in the panel discussion because it came up as well in Avril's question. So that's definitely something we can have a bigger discussion on at the panel discussion. So another one is, what kind of paper did you say again? A good carbon paper?
it was cartridge paper was the name of it. It's as far as I know, it's a watercolor paper. So it just sucks in the excess water, because quite often when you're using these kind of natural materials, you will find that they're a lot more watery and less viscous, maybe, or more viscous than other stuff. So if you have a fairly thick, and again, you don't have to spend a lot, but you just have to look for the right paper, and it's usually one that will suck up the actual. I don't know if you've probably done this at home with your own kids. You know, the kind of the printing paper, and they just blotch it with paint, and it's drenched through. Whereas this paper seems to still retain its structure, even when it's severely wet, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's the most of the questions that are in for now, and I'm really looking forward. Later on, you're doing an interview with Tristan Gooley at 7 o'clock. So that's something really nice for people to look forward to after we have dinner this evening, to come back and listen to that interview, because around natural navigation, I think that's going to be fantastic this evening, Davey. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to talking to Tristan as well. It should be fantastic.
Yeah, no, and thanks for all. I mean, I think just to say it again, we've been so lucky in GMIT because, you know, in the early years, we can kind of get very stuck in our own little space. And I'm speaking for myself personally. And since we're working with the Outdoor Ed, the merger has just been so enriching for me. I just can't say. I just think so. Thank you to you and all the team in Outdoor Ed, because you've brought such richness to our program. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, no, look, it cuts both ways. Bringing the early years into the Outdoor Ed as well, there's such a synergy between the two. It's a fantastic space, and I'm delighted that we can share it. So
yeah, no, we're really, really lucky. Okay, thank you, Davey, for now, and we'll go on to the next presentation. So next up we have Martina Killeen, and her presentation is called Creativity on the Go. Martina is an Outdoor Ed student in 4th year. She is an absolute inspiration. I have gone foraging at the back of GMIT with Martina, and within about 2 meters square, she can just find so many things to eat. It's just an absolute pleasure and a delight to have her. Hi, Martina.
Hello, how are you, everybody? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. I want to introduce myself. Yeah, I'm Martina Killeen. I'm living in South Sligo, near Tapacurry, along the Ox Mountains. And I'm a 4th-year outdoor education student. I'm extremely nervous. But I said before my my workshop, I have a little PowerPoint presentation prepared about a small business. I started it up about 5 years ago, and it's called Nature Inspires. So, and it hopefully does exactly what it says. It should inspire people, not just young people. I also work with older people in nursing homes. I bring nature into them as well. But I really enjoy working with young people and with very young people as well. So do I share my screen now?
I'll share now for you, Martina. And you can give me the nod when you'd like me to move on to the next slide. Okay. So let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. I love your first image.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I'll go down.
So my workshop, or my idea is actually creativity on the go. Creativity, like Davey said, and many other people, often everything is actually out there. We don't have to go to Mr. Price or any other places to buy material. And actually children are very good to use natural material when they're outside. So when children are outside, what I find often, they have really imaginative play. That's like the boy in the first slide, for example. He like being Superman with his cape and over his shoulder. But also those girls here in the tree, like they are looking for fairies. They were actually whispering when I asked them what they are looking for or what they are doing. And often I know we have the fairy doors and they're very static, but I think children imagine fairy doors, or they see holes like you can see here in the tree as well, holes in the trees or in the ditch or anywhere. Then imagining the wild animals or the meat-loving coniferous plants on the bog. Like I always say, we are surrounded by wild animals. Often we don't see them, but they are definitely there. They are watching us. Creativity, then working with really simple materials, creating nests, book hotels, or like Davey said, for example, with willow, it's a great material. You can do weaving, all sorts of things as well. Or just sometimes children just want to have a bit of giving them mind a rest. It's never at rest, but they don't want to share. They just want to sit and really chill out as well. So next slide, please. So we are very lucky. We live on a farm. I love animals since I was as young as those children here on the picture. And any animals of any kind, they just create fascination for young people and for children. And we are also quite privileged because we have no neighbors really very close by. Our animals all roam free. We live at a small road. There's very little traffic, and every car which passes, they know there are animals on the road or crossing or whatever. So children really love holding a duck or a chicken or even an egg where the chicken is in and feeling the heat coming off that. And then I have two lovely dogs who literally entertain the kids on their own as well, Lucy and Scotty. And yeah, all the wildlife. Often, as I said, we don't see it, but it's everywhere, even in those, in that tree. It's a dead tree stand, but it's full of wildlife. So next slide, please. Low cost, unstructured creativity. Everything is created, is a piece of art. That's quite important, I think, because wild weaving, for example, is something, even if you stick a few sticks like willows in the ground, you actually can weave on the spot. And it's good for your fine finger motoric as well. And while the children work with the material, you know, their senses are fully involved. For example, they smell all the different smells of the material. Like Davey as well, I do really very simple tools. They are the potato peelers, magnifying glasses. We do our own nature process as well. And then we create something like a dream catcher. That's really very popular because we have a lot of feathers from all the chicks in the yard. So they are collecting all bits and pieces there. Or the nature print is when young children even, they hold a hammer, similar like this, the saw. You know, they just learn how to hold the hammer and use it and do it on little cotton wool bags or even just little cotton wool stripes as well. Next one, please. Yeah, and once the children are here on our farm or on our land, there's so much to do and so much to create. And it's also a great place for learning that everyone is different. Somebody is more into animals, other people just want to create something, other people just want to roam around without any big purpose. So celebrating authenticity, I think, is very important, not just for the children, also for the instructors. So this little boy up there, he explained in detail actually what insect, he was building an insect hotel, what insect is living there or hopefully will be living there. Then we do those nature prints, or I'm so lucky I have many students in my year as well, who sometimes help me out. And this year is Oshin, and he actually is a scout leader, and he explained the children, how to use flint and steel, so they all get to go and with all the safety advices as well. Yeah, next slide, please. So leave no trace is core throughout. I'm an advanced leave no trace trainer. So when we are on we call it wildlife safaris, I just say leave what you find. This is, for example, a young heron fell out of the nest, died, and just was laid out very pretty in front of us. So we didn't really touch it. We just enjoyed the picture, and we talked about the various body parts and whatever questions the kids had. Then the other picture here, the boys and girls are watching a frog instead of holding it, because sometimes for the skin for the frog, it's not that good if we hold it, or we might squeeze it or whatever. So respect farm animals and wildlife as well. And then how to cross a meadow, either on a trail which is already there, or we're spreading out, and always look on the ground, see that we don't trample anything. And the other thing is, us big ones, we litter the field, and the kids collect all the rubbish. And then we talk about rubbish, and often you hear shocking stories actually that they have witnessed littering as well, at home or around home. And we discuss how long it takes to biodegrade the materials. It doesn't mean an awful lot at that particular age, but children understand way more about it than I feel sometimes adults do. Or there is a little fire pit down here, so we try to raise up the fire from the ground, that it doesn't kill off the little animals in the ground, or we do a mount fire then. Next slide, please. So especially last year, I was lucky to do under level 3 to hold a few workshops for children. Sometimes it's so important for children that they just get time to relax and unwind. And, often they either hang out in the hammocks for a while and giggle and laugh, or then children just find their own spot, like this little boy. He said he's just sitting too comfortably to move on. And it's actually like a tree hammock. The tree is formed like the hammock. So never underestimate the time for children, not always to be active, but also just lie in the grass, cloud surfing, give them time to chill out as well, time to relax. Yeah. And the last slide, please. And this is the Bouncy Bog, and that will be explained in the video. So I think we can go on to the video now. Thank you very much.
Oh, Martina, thank you so much. Any child would be just so happy to be there. And the pictures, it's just beautiful. It just brings it all to life. So yeah, I'll leave now. So the video is fabulous.
That's the video.
But this forest has something really special, and I'm monitoring it since many years, and that's a good few nests of the grey heron up here. And they come back every year. They are away in winter time, but they come back then once January comes, and they repair their nests. Another sign of the heron is you can see that they're very active, because you see all the new poo around. And the other day I discovered something really interesting, and this just is an eggshell. And it's really everybody who knows a grey heron, it's such a big egg, and actually a big bird, and actually the egg is so tiny. It's probably the size of a duck egg or a large hen egg, and it has this nice blue color. So sometimes when I go in here with the children, I don't mind if they just touch it sometimes, just have a look at it. But we tell them, yeah, leave it there, because this breaks down all the eggshells from last year are broken down, and this feeds back into the ground as well. Here's actually the top. So the good thing is, the happy thing is, there is somewhere up there, there's at least one heron baby. The sad thing is, sometimes in maybe April or May, when we get really bad winds or high winds and storms, it had happened before that one falls out of the nest. And then they are medium sized, they are really small young heron, too small to fly, and unfortunately they die. But what we also recognized, and I found that very amazing, that the parents, they know the bird fell down, but they tried to feed the baby. So we found actually fish, we found frogs, so they were still fishing for him. Maybe he was alive, they tried to feed him. So it is really, for not just for children, it's so interesting to see that the parents tried to feed him or tried to keep him alive. I actually found also crab claws from a white-clawed crayfish in here. So if you go in a forest and you find fish in there, you know, it's really some sight. So it's all learning, it's all really exciting stuff. But if we only start, or if we only keep going on the track, we never find those things. So sometimes it's good to get off your way. So here, for example, this looks like there is actually a nest came down. You can see that it's a lot of like debris, and you also can see that the birds also take some baling twine or anything what they find to actually weave into their nest as well. There's also a lot of deer in this area, here in those areas. I have them on my wildlife camera as well. The red deer. And pine marten. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, this is, a child discovered that once when we just walked around here. And since that, we call it the squirrel's den. Because we just can imagine that the squirrels sit in here and have their food like we would eat corn on the cob. And you can see clearly all the eaten cones as well. This is a full one here. Some just stripped. And even if you go further in, there's an awful amount of all sorts of, you know, half-eaten pine or fir cones. So things like that help really children to imagine, you know, how wildlife lives and what they are doing, and they become very creative in the ideas. So this is our squirrels den here in the forest. So we know there is red squirrels, and we have actually put some wildlife cameras up, and we have seen them hopping around as well. Yeah, so it's good to know that we have red squirrels here. So sometimes I said there is some of the birds falling out of the nests when they are a little bit older, and I actually just the other day I actually just found this one here well buried in there. So this is a head of probably a young, maybe even an older heron in here. But again, I always remind children, just leave what you find. So this is our second stop here. We are only very little, maybe 200 meters away from our first stop. It's a total different habitat. It's actually a raised bog here. You can see forestry all around, but there is no, you can't really plant plantation on the bog here. And I like to go up here with visitors or even with local people, and we do a little bit of a bog survey. We have a look what's growing on the bog, what makes really a bog so particular, special. There is, for example, up here you find loads of different mosses, you find different types of lichen, you find heather, like 3 different types of heather. But you also find perennials like sundew, bog aspodel, tormental as well. So it is actually quite a rich habitat up here, which is often ignored because sometimes the plants are so small. Children, again, in particular, we go up here with magnifying glasses and we literally crawl around the bog looking for the tiny bit of sundew, which is a coniferous plant. And I think there's a fascination, children thinking that their finger might be gone if they touch the sundew. So often their eyes are very good, so they find it once we have showed them a picture or once somebody has found them. And before we leave the bog, we do a funny activity. We call it the Bouncy Bog. Every child just starts hopping, and then there is this sensation like on a trampoline because the bog full of water. You know, it's quite funny to do that activity. They always ask for doing the Bouncy Bog. And we have been just collecting a little bit of materials. Most of it actually was down anyway, so we just picked it up. For example, the willows were cut out there, the birches were cut, so I just picked it up. But there's also really loose material. You can see a fern, you can see just some grass. I think I had seen bindweed as well. This here is dried up bindweed, a bit of moor grass, moss, and then my most popular plant is the rushes. Everything what's really bendable, what we can use for weaving or making little things. So this is all something which 0 cost, and it's just here lying on the ground. So here we are on our little nature campsite. That's where we usually, everything happens here, like we have our lunches here, everything. But it's actually a natural feature in itself. Nobody planted it, I don't think so. It's natural trees like native trees. It's the birch here, it's willow and some rowan. That all grows very well in that ground. And the most amazing thing is the canopy actually in summertime, because of the fine leaves of birch and willow and rowan, it's actually not a dark campsite. It's sheltered, but it has a very beautiful, it lets very beautiful natural light actually coming through. So it's a wonderful, still wild or wilderness campsite. And yeah, it's usually a very busy place here. So now we have all our natural material here, everything what we gathered, and usually I just leave it there and the children take the lead. They see what they want to do, and yeah, who knows? So this is what we made over the last 10 minutes here. This is an Easter egg, just with a bit of a willow bent into a shape of an Easter egg, and then weaving in and out with different loose materials, and you can decorate it as well. This is another one just done with rushes and willow. And then we made a little Easter egg, Easter nest here as well, and it's just with moss and a bit of bindweed, and it's actually something nice you can put out on Easter morning together with a few eggs, hard-boiled eggs, a bit of chocolate eggs, maybe a tiny little chicken as well here. And yeah, happy Easter. So this is our little camp area where we hold our nature camps. and the children come up here. We have lunches here, and we sometimes put a slack line up, very simple things. And always what's very popular with children is actually the hammocks. And they are lightweight. It's an Irish company, and it's very easy to just get them out and hang them up. All what you need is 2 trees and 2 strings to attach them. And it's very important with the strings, it's very important that you take them down afterwards, actually. I might put it in here. Whoop. So this is a little bit low, so we might just take it up here somewhere. No. Just do that a little bit further up. And then it should hold. So it's a little bit low, but you can tighten it, and here you have your hammer. You can sit into it. Shortly after I started my business in 2017, I applied to GMIT for being part of the outdoor education program to study outdoor education, and I'm nearly finished with my degree now in 2021 in May, and I have been so fortunate to everything what I learned I can really implement it here in the business Nature Inspires. And it's a lot of place-based learning, but it's also about experimental learning, and it's literally bringing people close and back to their natural environment. When I was a little girl, I told everybody I want to be a farmer, because both of my grandparents actually, they were farmers. And everybody told me, you have to marry a farmer. But that's not true. Dreams do come true. I'm here now living in, for my sense, in the most inspirational place on earth. And I just love passing on the knowledge and everything what I have learned to the next generation.
Martina, thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Very
I mean, it just lights me up. It's just amazing, amazing. So many fabulous comments. They think you should be on television and bring it to nationwide, and you're just a real inspiration. And the comments are just flowing in.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. No, I think it's something very easy to actually set up for individual people in their own area, because, for example, now in the pandemic, you know, within our 5K zone, it's really so important that we just appreciate our national parks outside the front door, because everything out there, hedgerows, everything, that's all, you know, it's all nature, pure nature. And yeah, I think there's many people out there who can do something very similar.
Yes, thank you so much. What we're going to do, we have a few questions, Martina, but we're going to take a refreshment break for 5 minutes, okay, until 4 o'clock, and we'll hold any questions for the panel discussion. Okay, so
perfect.
Yeah, so for everybody, if you just leave everything as it is, your screen on, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock, and I promise you, you will never visit the beach in the same way again once you see the next presentation. So we'll come back at 4 and have a short break, a stretch. So you're all welcome back to our final workshop for today. And this workshop takes place at Old Head Beach outside Westport in Mayo. And it's absolutely fascinating. It'll be presented by Orla Prendergast, a lecturer in outdoor education in GMIT. So really look forward to it. And after this, then we'll have some discussion and then go into panel discussion. Hi, Orla.
How are you doing?
Good. I'll leave and let you introduce yourself.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks very much, Mary. That's brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Orla Prendergast. So I teach on the outdoor education course in GMIT, and we would try as much as possible to teach outdoors, and we would run field trips out onto the mountains in woodlands, fresh water, hedgerows and so on. But one of my favorite places probably is the beach. There's so much life there. So you have animals trying to find somewhere to cling on to. You have some animals eating each other's, others hiding from each other's underneath the rocks, trying to cope with being battered by the waves, being dried out by the sun when the tide is out. So there's loads of activity there. There's loads of sort of nature concepts. There's eggs being laid, there's fertilization. So it's a great place to bring in sort of concepts to do with nature and how that whole web of life works. And what eats what and what's hiding from what and so on, and the adaptations that the animals have to try and survive in that environment. And the other thing about those field trips, like I said, we all sort of learn from each other. It's great having obviously students like Martina. When we go out on those trips, we sort of learn as much from each other, and I learn as much from the students as I'm sure they learn from me. So we've great times in those field trips, and it's so much more memorable outdoors than teaching things in the classroom. So like Mary was saying, we headed out to Old Head for this video. So Old Head is great. It's really sheltered. It's very safe. There's very little sort of risk of being washed away by waves. So you're all sort of checking you're going to pick somewhere nice and safe and sheltered. And we went there about 2 hours before low tide. So that means as much of the shore will be as exposed as possible. So there's plenty to see. And if you have a chance at all, if you went during when there's spring tides, when the tides are even much lower than normal, so that's twice a month at low tide, at a new moon and a full moon, you'll see even more of the seaweeds and more of the animals. Okay, so that's sort of an introduction to it there. So yeah, so if you want to
We'll be looking at various sort of zones in the beach, from what we call here the splash zone. So the tide doesn't come up here, but lots of the waves might occasionally splash. So it's a very salty place to live. So we'll start here, and then we're going to finish way down past the end of the pier behind us here at the low tide mark. So up here you have lichens growing. So this is a very common one, and it looks like the rock, but it's actually a black lichen. It's called black tar lichen, grown on the rock here, and that's a very common white one there as well. Other plants that you get in this splash zone would be sea pinks. So now we're in March, it doesn't look too pretty, but come summertime it has beautiful sort of pink flowers on it. So this is your splash zone, and then we're going to go and look at the next sort of set of seaweeds that grow below this. Okay, so we have been looking at the lichens over there. So they're in the splash zone. So the first seaweeds you're going to see are these little guys here. They're called channel rack. So they're very small, and they're only covered by water when the tide is fully in. So they might only be covered by the water for maybe an hour or two every day. And the thing about seaweeds is they can only make food, they can only grow when they're covered by water. So that's why these guys are so small, because they've only a chance of 1 or 2 hours per day. We're going from the smallest seaweed that we have on the beach here, which would be your channel rack, to the biggest, which is one of the kelps here. So this has got washed up after a storm. So kelps grow right down at the low tide mark. So they're rarely uncovered unless you have one of those super low tides, one of those spring tides. And they can get up to maybe 2 meters in length. Okay, so they attach themselves on, like old seaweeds have to attach themselves onto a rock. So when you're looking at a beach to go exploring, you want a rocky beach, because seaweeds need a foundation. So they have this like sucker feet, they're called holdfasts, that cling themselves on. So you can see all these seaweeds here have all these attachment points, but on occasion they get ripped off by a storm or whatever. And then I suppose a kelp is nearly like an oak tree, has mosses and lichens growing on it. And it's the same with this sort of kelp here. This is the main sort of stem, and it has lots of little extra red seaweeds growing on top of it. And then you have the main fronds. They're all sort of in strips here. Okay, because it's, I suppose, less resistance to the waves. So don't get washed off the rocks because there's less resistance. And growing on the fronds is actually another animal. So this is called a sea mat. So that's like a really sort of simple organism. There's loads of little cells there, and they filter the water through their bodies. So you have an animal living on the kelp. And let's see, is there anything else living on the kelp here? Yeah, okay, there's another guy. So you have, this is called a blue-rayed limpet, and you can see there's little sort of blue sort of stripes on it. And again, it's sort of moving around, feeding on the kelp. So it's its own little sort of ecosystem, the kelp itself, on the holdfast, on the stem, on the various sort of fronds. So yeah, fantastic piece of architecture. So you can have lots of different animals living on the seaweed. So this here is a flat winkle. So there's various types of periwinkles around, but this is a very common one. It can be yellow, brown, green in colour. So they're grazing animals that sort of crawl around. They can sort of eat the seaweeds or eat little tiny microalgae that we can't even see that are actually living on the seaweeds. So they're vegetarians, and they can be food for birds as well. Okay, so we're just on the wall of the pier here. So there's lots of interesting things attached themselves onto the wall. Obvious one here, you've got the green seaweed here at the bottom, and that's your sea lettuce. So it's very, very thin. You can nearly sort of see through it. So that's a very common green seaweed. And then we have the bladder wrack sort of attached on. As regards some of the animals, so we have the limpets. So the limpets grow very well on the rocks here, and they clamp on really, really tightly. And that's to, first of all, stop them getting washed away by the waves. And also then when the tide is out, they trap the water inside and they breathe through the water that they've trapped. So it's really important for them when the tide is out to cling on. And when the tide comes in, then they can move around. So they're grazing animals. So they might go half a metre away. They have like a home base here. Their shell is the perfect fit for that place, and then when the tide comes in, they can move around and they graze on the seaweeds. They've got really hard metal in their tongue, and they can sort of scrape the seaweed off like sandpaper. So there's lots of barnacles as well. So they're the little small white guys here, and they're permanently fixed onto the rock. So they have a really strong cement. There's more of them even a bit further down, sort of the bigger ones. And sometimes the rock can look completely white, there's so many of them. So they're fixed permanently in place. They're actually related to crabs and lobsters and shrimps. So they do have legs, but like I said, they don't actually move. So when the tide is in, they'll open out and their legs will come out and they can feed that way. So that's your limpets and then the small barnacles. So most of the animals we've been looking at have been vegetarians, but here, this is a dog whelk. So they are a snail, but these guys, so you can just sort of see him sort of tucking himself back into his shell. They have a little groove here. That's how you know the whelks. They have a little groove on the end of their shells. And these guys are predators. So they'll actually clamp themselves, say, onto something like a limpet, and they can release a chemical that softens the shell of the limpet, and then they drill a hole through the limpet. They inject like a chemical into the limpet that sort of liquefies his body, and then they can suck it out like a soup. So yeah, pretty impressive little animals, and they can feed on barnacles as well and on mussels. And again, they can be different colours. They can be sort of brown or white, and grow slightly bigger than that. Okay, so predators, whereas most of your snails are vegetarians. In the sand, you have a lot of worms live in the sand because there's a lot of sort of decaying seaweed or whatever that they feed on. And one of the interesting worms is one called the sand mason. Okay, so the stone masons built our pier behind us, and then the sand masons build this beautiful tube made of sand. And sometimes you can see bits of mussel shells that have been broken off, little bits of black inside it. So the worm himself is down deep in the sand. It can be about 30 centimeters down below us here. But when the tide comes back in the next couple of hours, the worm will sort of come up to the tip of the tube here, and they can sort of grab any floating material that's going by. Where are the lugworms? They're around here somewhere. Now here's some up here. So we won't again see the worms themselves. They're buried down into the sand, but they've eaten the sand and then they've passed this through their body. So it's the same as the earthworms in your garden will be eating the soil and taking the food out of that, and then they'll leave a pile of soil behind. These guys have left a pile of sand behind. And this can be really important food, these worms, for birds. So you get birds with big long beaks will be out here probing into the sand, these waders. So you see lots of them, say, around Westport in the mud flats, digging down and looking for these types of worms. Okay, so now we're down big rocky area, loads of humps and hollows. So these are the rock pools. This is probably everybody's favourite part of the day. There's huge amounts to see here. Every rock pool is different. So you've got obviously lots of your limpets. You can have the anemones, those little red blobs. You can have crabs, hermit crabs, which are the crabs living inside the shells. You can have prawns, small fish, blennies, sponges underneath the rocks. So there's a huge variety here. So you have to sometimes spend a few minutes looking to see what's moving inside the rock pools. So we'll have a look and see what's living inside them. Okay, so we found ourselves a nice little pool here. So we've got a good mix of seaweeds growing. This is an interesting one here. It's called coral weed, right? And when you see it's a lovely sort of pale pinky colour. And the reason it gets the name coral weed is it's really sort of hard when you feel it. It's not as silky and moist as the other seaweeds. So it takes in calcium from the water. So in the same way as the limpets make their shell from the calcium from the water, these guys put the calcium into their fronds, and it means then it's much harder to be eaten. So it's a protective thing to stop the limpets and stuff grazing on them. So coral weed, and it's very common in the rock pools. It doesn't like being out of the water, so you'll always see it in the rock pools. Okay. We also then have loads of these. So these are your edible periwinkles. So they all have that sort of white inner half here. They're a point on them, compared to, there's another one of those flat periwinkles, and they're completely sort of flat on top, and they're much brighter colours like the greens and the yellows. But they are related, but just pointy for the edible, flat for the flat. Okay. And then sometimes we'll try and see them later on. You actually have hermit crabs live inside these periwinkles, so we'll track some of them down for later. But these guys, the periwinkles, have what they call like a trapdoor on their body. It's called an operculum. So that means if they're being attacked or if the tide goes out, they can seal themselves shut. They can pull this sort of door, close the door after them. And when they're grazing, then they stick their head out. You see the little antennae sticking out like you have your garden snail, okay, at home. Okay. So we'll put him back in. So that's the important thing. You take these animals out, that you put them back into the same rock pool that you originally found them in. Okay, so we'll put him back inside there. What else have we got here? Yeah, so you have sort of the seaweed here. It's a bladder wrack, but it also has a red seaweed, like these little tufts growing on it. So this is called Polysynphona. So it's a red seaweed, and it'll attach itself onto the knotted rack and onto the bladder rack here. Sometimes it can actually weaken it and cause it to break off. So like I said, it's nearly like the mosses and lichens growing on the bark of a tree. Okay, and actually, no, it's not a huge piece. But this orange, right, that is actually an animal. So that's called a sponge. So you can get green sponges and orange sponges grown onto the rocks. So they're a really sort of simple animal, and they just sort of filter the water, seawater through their bodies, grab any food that's there and squirt it out the other end. Red seaweeds. And it's grown here on the egg rack. So it has these sort of big bladders that keep it afloat. Look, you can sort of see the amount of the red seaweed grown on top of it there. And we also have this little fella is pepper dulse. So people for cooking like to add added in. Actually has quite a sort of strong sort of flavour to it. Okay, so now we've another, we had an orange sponge earlier, and this is another sponge. It's a green sponge, breadcrumb sponge. And sometimes when they're green, they actually have an algae, a seaweed living inside the animal. So the seaweed is making food by photosynthesis, and then the sponge is actually absorbing water and sieving the food out of that. So really sort of simple animals. You see the little pimples nearly on them. So that's, they pull the water in one of those and squirt it out the other. So yeah, we have a beetlet anemone here, and he's completely open. He's covered by the tide, so he's open, looking for food that might sort of float by. He's got little tentacles then that can sting, and if there's very small fish, he can grab them. Okay, so we have a bucket here. These are things we collected in the beach, sort of went for a walk, stuff that was washed up on the tide, and yeah, sort of an assortment here. So you'll often see this sort of washed up. This is sort of the holdfast of the furze bellows kelp. It nearly looks like a little sort of sea hedgehog. So if you see those, that's what they are. I found sort of two of them just sort of walking along the beach there, and then it would grow out of that. So they're amazing looking seaweeds. So we'll put them over there. Another thing you might occasionally see is the bone from a cuttlefish. So they're a relative of the octopus and the squid, and this is an internal like buoyancy that helps them float on the surface. And sometimes people put it in the cage with their canaries as well. It's good for the beaks of the birds. Another thing that we picked up, it nearly looks like melted plastic, but this is actually the eggs from a whelk, the common whelk, and it's just, like I said, they actually feel like a lump of plastic. And they normally should be attached onto the rock, whatever, but they've got washed in. So eggs from a common whelk. So that's a relative of the dog whelk, so one of the snails. What else have we got here? Yeah, so this, sometimes you'll see these actually in a pair. These have sort of got broken apart, but it's from a razor clam or a razor shell, and they'll bury vertically down into the sand. And they'll filter the food through their body again, like the mussels or whatever. So razor clams. Okay, so in sandy areas, they'll be buried down deep. All right. What else have we got? This is just another type of mermaid's purse, and you can actually see how they used to attach themselves onto the seaweed, sort of wrap around the seaweed, and then that would float there while the egg is grown inside the purse here. And that's from a cat shark. Okay, so like I said, you have rays, skates, and various types of sharks use mermaids' purses. What else do we pick up? Yeah, just half of a mussel shell. So they're what they call bivalves. Generally, they're in a pair. So we have a pair, but they obviously don't match. So that's often the case. Okay, so they'll cling onto the rock and filter the water through their body. What else do we hear? Various types of those top shells, or sorry, they're the flat winkles. So like I said, you can have green and brown ones and yellow ones, and they'll feed on the seaweeds. And this is another nice sort of coloured one. It's sort of faded a bit. He's been on the beach, I say, a long time. It's one that's called a top shell, a purple top shell. So they've got nice sort of bands on them. And then they have, it's a top shell because they have the mains are opening, but then they've got like a little pinhole here beside it as well. So they're the only type of the snails that would have that. So that's a top shell. Yeah, so yeah, plenty of things. I mean, even like I said, half an hour of collecting. So what you want to do obviously is collect the animals that have got washed up, that are dead. You don't want to be taking things alive. But there's plenty of stuff that you'll find washed up on the beach. So hours of fun trying to figure out what eats what, who is who. In a rock pool, we found 2 hermit crabs. So hermit crabs use the shells of periwinkles or dog whelks to protect themselves. So they have a very sort of soft covering. And as they get bigger, then they have to sort of swap and find bigger shells. So we just put them into the container here so you can see them better. And then once we've had a look at them, we'll put them straight back into the rock pool. So, you never want to put any sea animals obviously into fresh water. Ideally, when you sort of catch them, you can just even softly, put them into a container, then maybe into a bigger bucket, look at them for a while, and then replace them. And not to use nets, because sometimes if you use a net, their legs can get sort of tangled up. So things like shrimps, prawns, crabs, it can damage them. So just use a container, or even use your hand and then put them into a bigger container. The other thing we have here in the container is just a stone here, and it has a keel worm on it. So it actually makes an outer covering, and then the worm lives inside it. So named after the keel of the ship, they're sort of long and narrow. You'll also see the same type of idea. There's another worm, and this one's growing on a seaweed. This is actually called serrated rack or saw rack. It has a very sort of sharp edge on it, and you see that about 3/4 of the way down the beach. And then it has this sort of spiral tube worm living on top of it. Another thing we just sort of saw grown on this on a piece of sort of kelp that was washed up. And these are the eggs, and I think it's from a banded chink shell, and they can be various sort of colours. So there's all sorts of things, like I said, growing on seaweed. So there's all these like mini little worlds attached onto the seaweed. So you can have hours of fun, I suppose, when you come down here to the rock pools. Every day you come, you'll find different things, and you can take a photo, you can go back home, look it up on the internet to try and identify it. But even just setting the kids a task, find the smallest shell, the biggest shell, the most colourful seaweed, whatever it happens to be. There's definitely hours of fun here. And you can bring your containers, look at the animals inside the plastic containers to get a better sort of close-up view. So the main thing, I suppose, you're opening windows of wonder by going to places like this. You can see, like I said, you can see the vegetarian animals, you can see the predators, you can see the symbiosis, that breadcrumb sponge that has the algae living inside its body. So all nature is at work here. You've got the crabs eating on the dead, decaying animals. So all life is here on the rocky shore. So it's out there, go, have fun, explore, get your feet wet.
Orla, thanks so very, very much. I genuinely will never go to the beach with the mindset. I'll be there going with a completely different mindset than I ever have gone before. And loads of comments coming in about your passion, your enthusiasm. Just another one, oh, this is amazing. Oh my, I never knew so much lived in seaweed, and there'll be mind fun when exploring it. And lots of students as well saying they miss you, Orla.
I miss you too.
So yeah, we have a few questions before we go into the panel discussion. So one of them is, will kelp look the same in all oceans?
Well, I suppose there's different types of kelp. No, you can get bigger kelp. You may have seen some of those documentaries, the sea otters. In California, they have kelp that could be 30 meters in height. So it would vary a bit. So there's different types of kelp. So the Irish ones is a bit smaller than the Californian kelp, but it's the same principle applies. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Bill Brady is wondering, do you do guided trips for primary schools?
Well, we don't, but say some of the other outdoor centres, say like Achill Outdoor Education Centre, or there's a centre down in Burren, that are close to the coast. So they would run sort of field trips for school groups, but in the college we don't. So there's a Field Studies Council based up in Sligo, and they run it as well. But there's definitely opportunities for other people to run it. And there's good information, say, on the Marine Institute, have a good sort of website, and they have a Marine Explorer sort of section that has lots of ideas for things to do with kids and sort of surveys to do. So that's worth checking out. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe somebody.
Yeah, there we go. Ballycroy National Park as well. Yeah, visitor centre. So they're very close to the coast. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, maybe somebody will put that in the chat box. And somebody else has said, have you written a family-friendly resource to allow for identification for these items?
Well, there is some good resources out there. And actually, at the start of the full video, I sort of show you the covers of some of the good books. So the Field Studies Council, they're a UK organisation, and they have lots of sort of laminated charts, and they have things to do with tree identification or flowers, clouds, lichens, and they've got 2 different guides for the seashore, and they're sort of child-friendly, nice, good pictures. And then there's 2 Irish guidebooks. They're small books, one called The Beginner's Guide to the Irish Seashore, and The Irish Seashore is another sort of newer one by Collins Press. So yeah, so at the start of the video sort of shows you the cover of those books. So they're 3 I'd recommend.
Yeah, so again, all these videos will be up online in full. So Avril has a big introduction. All the introductions will be there with more information. What else? How many seaweeds can you have, Orla? What kind of colours?
Yeah, well, hundreds of seaweeds really, but there's 3 colors. So there's red, green, and brown. So the bigger ones tend to be the brown ones, but there's loads of red ones, and they're the sort of the smaller ones, and they're the most numerous. But there's probably about 6 or 7 really common big brown ones, and if you can identify those, and they grow at different levels on the beach. Yeah.
Okay. And in seaweed bats, which ones are used? Which of the seaweeds are generally?
So any of them would work, but they tend to use. I'm not a great seaweed bat person,
No.
but I think it's this the saw rack, the serrated rack, is the one they use. But now I could be wrong. I'm sure there might be better expert there on seaweed bats. But I think it's that one. Yeah.
No, I think that's all the just loads and loads of lovely people reminiscing about their times at the beach.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
great
you've
memories.
really brought the memories flooding back for everybody. Wonderful exploration and information. Loads of thank yous. I mean, your passion again, Orla, just bursts through. It's absolutely incredible.
Well, that's it. Yeah, the seashore does it. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's a fantastic place to go. There's always something interesting happening.
Yeah. Now, before we're going to head in now to our panel discussion in a couple of minutes, I just want to, I suppose, I'm sure everybody has just got so many ideas from the workshop this afternoon, the workshops. And I'd like to just thank Georgia Macmillan again, who's done an incredible job coordinating the event. And you'll see her again tonight at 8 o'clock on the Dark Skies event with Jed Dowling. So that's something for the whole family. And Davey will be back later as well at 7 for his interview. I want to thank Sean Malloy from Blue Flag Media, who did all of the videos, took great care, went over bits. So thank you very, very much to Sean for the Trojan work that he did. And finally, I think we have Therese Ruan on the line. We had anyway earlier on and may still be there because Therese was the coordinator of SIPSI in Mayo, and she spearheaded our first conference and spearheaded many of the initiatives. So thank you so much to Therese. I don't know how you do everything that you do and keep everything juggling and all the balls juggling in the air. So very thank you and best of luck to you down in Achill. They're very lucky to have you. I think now we can get ready. Louise is going to join us for the panel discussion, and we'll bring back all the panelists and we'll just go through the outstanding questions that we have from all the different speakers. So we'll just give a minute for everybody to get on screen and we'll take it from there. And Louise, you might lead the charge in some of the questions.
Certainly. Thanks, Mary. I know the panelists are all joining there now, and certainly it's been a really inspirational afternoon. From wanting to go pond dipping, I'm never going to the beach again. The same, Orla, Davey, I'm literally sending the kids out to back garden tomorrow to make clay. I was just fascinated with that. And Avril, as somebody who works in the sector, I was truly inspired by your setting and Martina, and I know Martina, and I know Martina's Nature Inspires. I know where it is, and I know loads of children who've been to it, and it is certainly it's a wonderful experience for children, and hopefully once the restrictions lift, Martina, I'll be able to come out and visit. Martina does wonderful things in the community, from little bouquets being displayed for people to just pick up as they drive past, or duck eggs or her eggs. They're often left on the giving shelf, which is just on the road there for people. So it's something, I suppose, I know Martina's place personally, so it's wonderful to see you, Martina, and to share that experience with everybody. And I know one of the comments said that Martina, and I think all the panelists, should be on Nationwide, and I really do think let's contact them and make them do a show about this, because we need to spread the word. Lots of questions have come in over the last 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So I'm going to kind of get to them, and hopefully we can get through as many as possible. But we're going to start with you, Avril, and around the curriculum in your setting. And I know earlier on Mary touched on a little bit about the emergent curriculum. But one of the questions that has been asked is, do you follow a curriculum, or is it just free play You know, is it emergent? What happens there? And I suppose, how do you document it?
So we follow an outdoor ethos with a child emergent curriculum. I'm very wary of people saying free play because they have their own judgment on that sentence, you know.
Yeah.
And I am a believer of free play, but a lot of people think that they need to be in a structured setting. So I kind of stay away from that, but we are child emergent, and so we're there to facilitate. How we document, if you want to skip onto that and go on to the paperwork side of it, every child has an A5 book, a hardback book, and the teacher puts in a little story to the child on an observation that the teacher would have had. So each teacher has 6 or 7 children. So that particular teacher stays with the child for the 2-year curriculum. And every 2 to 3 weeks, the teacher will put in a little letter to the child and maybe a photo, and just to allow the child can sit down and look at the book, and they love reading it because it's all about them and it's to them as well. And they'll add to it. So they'll write in what they think was in the photo through drawings and sketches. And the teacher is observing that as well. So later on, the teacher will write down what John said while he was looking through his book. Also, we send it home as well quite often. And a parent will write in a letter to the child as well, if they went maybe for a walk on the beach at the weekend or something like that, that they'll write what they observed or what fun they had at the beach. So it's very much a book for the child from all of the people that are really important to the child in their young life.
It's a real partnership, Avril.
Yes, yeah. And that's what we show TUSLA when they come to inspect. That's our paperwork. I'm a big believer on slowing down with paperwork. We're outdoors, and it's not easy being outdoors. You know, the easy option is in my opinion, going indoors, because you don't have the wind on your face. You don't have all the elements constantly. Whereas when you're outdoors, you're enjoying the elements and you're enjoying everything, but it is a little bit tiring too, you know, compared to the indoors. So I think that if I am training teachers in to come and join me and show them the love of the outdoors, they can't be asked to sit down for hours to do paperwork as well. So that's the paperwork side of it. My curriculum is child-led, and a lot of teachers find it difficult, and I have a great team now at the moment, but when I explain what I want to them, they kind of get a bit worried, because in a normal indoor setting, what I've experienced is that the child takes the material off the shelf, and then the teacher sits with the child for 20 minutes and explores that material, and then puts it back on the shelf and goes to something else. And it's very kind of structured and relaxed. Whereas outdoors, little Johnny could be doing something with the caterpillar, and then Anne-Marie wants to go over here and find little bugs under rocks. And 5 minutes later, Johnny wants to do something else, you know, and it's all very fast, but we have to keep up. So we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and we need to think like a 3-year-old. And that's what we do, you know, and if we don't do that, we're not doing our job. We're not facilitating the child. So that's my own opinion. Yeah.
Thanks, Avril. Yeah, it sounds like a real partnership. I like the idea of slowing down the paperwork, and certainly I'll be taking some of that away. Mary?
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering, Martina, about the hammocks. What company do you get those hammocks from? Do you know that, or?
I put it actually, I think I put it already in the chat. Perfect. It was asked there. Hammocology or something like that. It's an Irish company in Cork. They're lightweight. If you can bring them for a walk as well when you go outdoors. And children sometimes just want to bury themselves in the hammock. They close them above and say, do not disturb, kind of. So I think it's quite important. And the rocking is also very good for children. You know, they can lie there for a long time then.
Oh, for sure. There's nothing nicer than do nothing. Do you know,
yeah.
It's underestimated, I think.
I might do that after this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Martina.
Welcome.
So, Davey, there's a question in here around when you're digging up the soil for the clay. What happens if you get bugs or insects?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the video clip there, I actually spotted an earthworm going into that bucket. So basically, everything is returned back. So they're going to get a shower. They're going to get wet, but hopefully they'll have survived through it. I obviously, you know, you want to be kind to everything you find, and so it's just another added process. So quite often, before you add any water, you just start to remove maybe a rock and the stuff that you can see that clearly is just too big. So in that sense, that's probably the time to actually start taking out some of the creepy crawlies, identifying them and returning them back to their home. So I'm hoping it's not too traumatic to the earthworm to get spun around like that and be placed back into wet soil. So, but again, you know, the minute you go digging, you're going to find something. And so it's about inquiry and leading the child. And, you know, quite often they might stop the whole process of play because they want to just look at the worm. And I think you have to give them time and space to do that as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Davey. And I often love sitting with children looking at spiders' webs on a frosty day, just the intricate detail of that and taking that time to do that. Yeah, thanks, Davey.
Somebody made a comment here saying, can Martina and Orla join forces, start their own eco program on TV? So that would be one to watch. For sure. Just a question for Margaret, and I think you may have answered it, but I'll ask again, Margaret. For a man-made pond, do you need to add water from another pond, or will species arrive naturally, like the beetle who uses the moon reflection?
They will arrive naturally because a lot of those beetles, they can fly. So when we first put in the pond in Croy, we let it fill up with rainwater. We had a rainwater collection tank as well as part of the build, so that helped us fill it. And then we did gather some plants from some bog pools and put the plants in there, but we didn't bring any animals or anything to it. They just all arrived by themselves. And for the first few years, we used to have lots and lots of frogs. But in the more recent years, we do still have the frogs coming, laying the frog spawn, but we've lots and lots of newts in there. So what we'll see later on in the year is all the newt tadpoles coming out. So that was like the last couple of years, we've actually had more newts or newt tadpoles by the end of the year than frog tadpoles. And the thing when you're building a pond as well, that pond has 3 different depths. So there is a deep pool, a middling pool, and then a very shallow pool. So where the frog spawn was laid was in the shallow side. And that's really important because the froglets, they're not going to climb up the side of a really steep part of the pond. They need the vegetation to grab onto and to walk out that way. So there are lots of different designs of ponds online as well that you can make a pond very easily out of like even a plastic tray or something in your back garden. It's not that difficult to make, but the most important thing is not to put tap water into it because there's obviously chemicals in tap water. So rainwater fed is the best.
Oh, thanks, Margaret.
Great. Orla, an interesting question. I actually thought about this myself. If I see seaweed washed up on the shore with signs of life on it, should I put it back into the ocean?
the things that are on it will probably die, because generally the seaweed will be in a different location. If it's been ripped off the rocks, the seaweed is going to dry out, and the animals will probably dry out and die as well. So if you wanted to bring it back to your garden for fertilization, I think that's okay, because the animals are going to die anyway, really, because they've been already taken out of their preferred position. So I would think it'd be okay. I mean, if there's anything big and obvious, you'd obviously take it off, like a big snail, but the things that are permanently attached, they're going to die with the seaweed, I think, if it's up on the beach.
Thanks, Orla.
Okay.
Another question for Avril, and it's really about parents. And do you have parents, it's probably two parts. Do you have parents who are concerned about risk? And how do you get parents on board? You know, somebody wondering, with the idea of being outside and muddy play, that they find it's hard to get beyond that.
Once a parent rings me, I explain. Once the parent rings me asking about a place in our setting, I explain exactly what we do. So from the get-go, they understand everything we do, that we're outdoors 100%, and that we're enjoying all types of weathers. And what's great about Ireland is it's never going to get too cold, you know, so we are in a kind of a mild enough climate. What else did you ask there?
The other one was like for parents so that was getting parents on board. And do you have parents who are concerned about risk, and it's part of the same kind of a...
Oh, we do, yes, we do. But the risk is, it outweighs the positive, or the positives outweigh the risk. And I explain that to parents, as in with risks, like for example, climbing a tree, or that little boy on Martina's video sitting in the tree, how he got down up into that and how he got down out of that, it was up to him, you know, and that gave him kind of a happiness inside that he could accomplish that. And that's what we're all about, encouraging children to do what they want to do in a safe environment. So, and we're there to facilitate and observe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Avril. I'll go back to you, Louisa.
So Martina, this one is for you. And again, it's around, I suppose, saving the wildlife. If you came across a young heron that fell out of the nest and their parents were not attending to it, could it be brought to a wildlife sanctuary for care and be released once old enough? Or should you just leave it alone?
We have here in South Sligo, we have eagles flying. You know that yourself, Louise. And I would actually ring Lothar for advice and let him come out. But there's also a little bird sanctuary in Canada, Little Wings bird sanctuary. So I have 2 numbers. I will contact them, you know, and see what they are thinking. And they will come out and assess the bird. And yeah, if it's then still alive, yeah. I once found a bird, a young bird, but he was very weak, actually. And by the time my children tried to feed, we had mackerel in the fridge. But by the time, you know, we actually could make that decision to ring somebody, the bird was already dead then, yeah. But it's always 1 or 2 fall out every year, but a good few survive.
Yeah, eagles flying, it's a great resource there in Sligo.
Absolutely.
Anybody gets a chance, I'd highly recommend it over the summer to give it a visit.
Good entertainment,
yeah.
And Davey, a question for you. Can any tree branch be used for the pencils?
Sorry, unmute again. Yeah, you just want living, so you just want green wood. I mean, I tend to use willow because it harvests so well and it grows back so vigorously, but you can. So what you're looking for is you have to cut it from a tree. So there's no point picking up a dead branch from the floor, for example. You might be lucky, you might get something that's been blown down that's still fairly vigorous and still has a bit of life into it. I tend to use broad leaf trees, but again, experiment. Like the joy of all this is finding out whether it works or not. And again, like I think it's really important that people don't think that they need to undertake a formal training program to experience this stuff, because as Orla said, I mean, there's loads of guidebooks out there, there's loads of YouTube, there's so much technology out there. We can spend 5 minutes watching a YouTube clip and 5 hours outside thanks to it. So again, the first initial response should be, where's my raincoat, where's my boots? Get outdoors, grab a child, and just hopefully your own child. But and that's it. And and I tell you, having done formal training courses, I mean, when you actually have to do this stuff yourself, that's when you really bank the knowledge. When there's no expert there over your shoulder saying, do it this way and do it that way. And literally within 2 or 3 attempts, it just becomes something that you fully understand, because it's such a tactile experience, and you can't understand it unless you communicate with the material you're working with, or the species you're looking at, the trees, so it's, again, just, bring your raincoat, boots, go outside, and everything else is available to you from there on.
Thanks, Davey. Thanks.
I might come in there as well, because I think people sometimes are a little worried to go out and, especially in a formal education setting, go out and, go pond dipping or go looking for species on the seashore, because they're worried they're not going to know the names of them. And I think Anya made a really good point, is giving the kids the charts to see, can they find it out themselves. And I think sometimes as adults, we're worried about getting things wrong, but it's okay to say that we don't know, and let's try together and find out what it is. So I think that's a really important thing for all of us as educators to acknowledge. We can't know everything, but we can try and find the answer.
Absolutely, Margaret. Yeah.
Thanks, Margaret. So this is a kind of an open question to the whole panel, and I'm actually going to be intrigued to hear this conversation. Do the panelists think that the word risk is overused, and in fact is just very ordinary activities or movements are labeled as risky play, when in fact it's just normal everyday interaction with the world we live in? Who'd like to take that one or start the conversation? So are we overusing the word risk when in fact it's just normal everyday interactions? Avril, do you want to?
Yeah, you are right. Risk, it's become the word we all use now, or the phrase. But with the 2D, with the screens and all that, walking down the road is nearly a risk at this stage. We're all so kind of soft in a way, So I think that, it's compared to an indoor education setting. I suppose the word risk is used a lot out for outdoors, and it really shouldn't be, because, as you said, it's what we all used to do as children. It's a normal thing to do, to climb a tree. But there's a risk assessment done on that tree. It's just the way the world has gone. Yeah.
Anybody else want to come in on that?
Go on, David.
No, go on.
But just from my personal experience as a mother, I have a 3-year-old, and before that, I've been working with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and we're part of the government, so there is a lot of talk about risk assessments and what's safe to do and what's not safe to do. But when I go outside now with my own child, and things that I would have been worried about school groups and children doing in school groups, I'm letting my own child go off and climb trees and run up paths and go off exploring. And it's kind of opened my eyes a bit to, and I think the talks that we've had since last night, and being more child-centered in when we're working with children, I think we need to reframe the way we're thinking and put ourselves in the shoes of the child and what's the best for them. Obviously, and trying to create the safe environment, we're always going to try and create the safe environment, but we have to let the child fall, to experience that as well. And it's part of their development. And even growing up, I'm the eldest of 6, and it was a very busy household, and we were outside all the time for hours on end. We were told to come back in when we were hungry. No different to what Avril says with the kids, to eat when they're hungry. And I just think that Yeah, I think there's too much talk about risk now, and we need to change that. We need to kind of go back to basics, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Davey, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that quite often it's the transition from one environment to the other environment, and especially going into a new environment. And, you know, I've noticed that, like, for example, at home with a young child, you've got a fire guard, you know, you're going to prevent them from the risk of the fire. But then eventually you're going to say to yourself, I don't really need that anymore, or the child doesn't need that to be there anymore. And so the more you can go outdoors and the more the child grows up outside, the less the risk is. I mean, again, to one child, a tree is just another opportunity. To another child, they mightn't have ever climbed a tree before. So it's really about exposure, and to mitigate, the best way to mitigate risk is to let them play outside, to let them self-assess, you know, let them understand what's going on. And we heard that from Tim Gill and even Angela yesterday, really inspiring and really thought-provoking, that, you know, the child has to develop and they have to learn. And so I'm not sure if I'd like to do away with risk, because I think risk is something fundamental to human development. And if we kind of ignore risk, we might be ignoring a fundamental aspect of our own personal development. So, yeah, it's a very interesting question, but I think a lot of the time it's about the best way of mitigating risk is to expose the child to as much of that environment as possible. So,
thanks for that. I just want to, I know it's a video that Davey, you introduced me to, and I just want to bring it up again. It's Tim McCarthy's video, yeah, and it's called The Children's Fire. And it's just a beautiful video about the teachings of the elders of ancient America, and that they understood the need to reflect and the balance and wisdom observed in nature. So they made this promise, it was the children's fire, and it was a reminder of the first promise that no law and no action of any kind shall be taken that will harm the children. And I do think it is, I mean, we can really work to rekindle that idea, because children are just not placed at the heart, you know, of policies or institutions of power. And it's at our own detriment that we don't think of a society, like what kind of a society is it that we don't place children, the children's fire at the center of its institution of powers. And I think we need to construct a future where that is really considered, you know, always thinking about the impact on children and really, really holding them central. And I think that can be top down and bottom up, and we can do our bit, and policy really needs to come in as well and do that. I think, you know, it's just a simple message, but such wisdom in it. I just wanted to share that there. Yeah. And you can, I don't know if there's more questions, Louise, but I can put a link up to that video. Again, Dave, you introduced me to it, but I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, and
I think it's gone into the chat box there. The link.
Oh, thank you.
I should say that it was Richard Love who made me aware of it. It was a Burn Bio talk actually last year. But yeah, it's a phenomenal little 20-minute video clip. And it really makes you question about what kind of society we live in, because our society is so adult orientated, so adult driven. Every single thing we do is based around the adult, not the child. And again, if you just a little thought experiment, what might a world look like if a child could draw it or develop it? And I can tell you one thing, school would take a big hit. There's so many areas, you know, homework, and they would genuinely probably just adapt to a much more playful orientation. They've done this experiment with coding, young children coding with video games, and what they're creating is something so playful and so creative in context to what the adult thinks a child computer game would look like. So I know we're talking about outdoors, but again, allowing that child to develop their own world is it's a fantastically powerful concept. So I really recommend people just either Google it or follow the link. So.
Yeah, and Tim Gill's new work is really, that's what it questions. And he's looked at loads of cities around the world, like Tirana in Albania, where they've intentionally placed children at the heart of their urban design. And Rotterdam have been doing it since 2006. And what they're finding is that child-friendly cities everybody wants to visit them. They attract people. So Rotterdam is becoming a really, and it's not playgrounds, it's just spaces, for kind of, social spaces. He talks about our freedoms to roam for in adolescents, and it's just absolutely, I think it's really, really powerful if we did that. And some great examples of communist cities even that have really put this at the heart of their policy, and it has made a huge difference. So yeah, hopefully the policymakers will think about things in that way. It would be great.
So I suppose a question that has come up throughout the last night and today is around insurance. And Davey, I thought your idea earlier was genius around, we can't give them hammers, but when you held up the wooden hammer, I was like, why has nobody thought of that? Why didn't I think of this much sooner? So again, to the panel, how do we overcome, we talk about risk and that risk adverse, and then the fear of risk, and then we have the fear of litigation, and we have the fear of court, and it's been, I suppose, questions we've seen throughout the last 2 days. Any suggestions on how to help? And I know with Martina and Avril, how do you overcome these? And Orla, bringing children to the beach, and Margaret and Davey, fires, like these are all really dangerous things. But how do we overcome the insurance and the world litigation piece? Or how do you overcome it in your individual settings and spaces?
Well, with myself, insurance is a hot topic in early years. Through COVID and in previous years, it's just very hard to get, never mind tools at all. But so what I use is just being sensible and having your feet grounded and being a calm, collected person and just enjoying your surroundings. And if a child wants to make something like the bench that they wanted to make, we do it, but we do it in a calm, organized way. If you're going to be caught by insurance all the time, in my opinion, we would do nothing. We'd sit on our backside and do nothing, because insurance companies they're not going to put their foot out too far to help you, the kind of way. All the parents in my setting know exactly what we'll be doing. They know, they want their children to be able to experience all these things, all these natural, and holding a hammer, it's the feeling of the heaviness, and it's so many more things than actually swinging it, and it's the talk around it as well, and the child understanding safety measures and understanding what he wants to do with it. So there's so much else around it, but I don't really, insurance, look at, it's a mad world around insurance, so I don't really kind of go there anymore.
Yeah. Anybody else want to come in?
I agree with Avril. The best thing is you talk to parents, but parents actually are quite relaxed, or they seem to be relaxed. But then you also talk to the children. Your staff is very important, that they know, especially if you have a child, for example, which has a particular allergy, or if you have to carry an EpiPen or something like that, we have little staff meetings beforehand and talk about all of that. Like Avril said, insurance, like we have a farm insurance, which is only on our land regarding liability. But we also, I also have a business insurance for low activities, for not a high risk, for low risk activities like nature walks. But, if I just keep on that, it's impossible actually. And it's actually funny enough, it's the same insurance. I pay them twice for the same land. And I'm sure if something happens, they actually won't pay, even though they get the money for the full year from me for the two insurances. But I have to have both insurance regarding the farm. If somebody trips on the land, you know, or whatever, even strangers not passing the land and all that. Yeah, but insurance, like as you said, you just, if that child wants to climb the tree, somebody is standing beside it or watching it. And I think you have to trust children as well. I think we just don't have confidence in our children or in the children, you know, what we are looking after for a few hours. Also, I do a little bit, I know a good few of those children, and I trust them in certain ways. You have to mind them, but you still, you know, you can't tie them down or anything, especially with fire. You have to be very careful and, you know, do all the safety measures, but you have to go about it in a sensible way.
Yeah, thank you, Martina. Absolutely. Our time has drawn to a close so very, very quickly. So we will wrap up. I just want to thank Louise Kilban for moderating, and Joanne Doherty as well, all the questions in the background and bringing them forward before we finish up for this session. I think there's a new link for the next session. That's right, Georgia, is probably, yeah, I think it's been posted in the chat box. So the next session will be Davey's interview with Tristan Gooley, and then the Dark Skies event. So we've a nice 2-hour break now to get outside and go for a walk, and we'll resume again at 7 o'clock this evening.
Right.
Okay.